Gather close. This is ghost stories to tell in the dark. Tonight, I'll share with you not one, but many strange encounters, each more haunting than the last. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, so we can map the reach of our haunted circle. Story number 1. It all started as a joke, a lark born from boredom and the peculiar artifacts you find in a deceased grandparent's attic, the air thick with the smell of mothballs and forgotten lives. And for me, it was my grandmother's house, a sprawling, creaking Victorian that held more shadows than furniture, a place where I spent a summer cataloging her esoteric collections of porcelain dolls with chipped, knowing smiles and dusty books on botany that felt more like anatomical drawings of something not quite plant nor animal. The board itself was unremarkable, a simple piece of aged cardboard with the letters and numbers painted in a faded, almost weary black, the sun and moon in the corners looking more like tired, bloodshot eyes than celestial bodies. But the planchette, that was the thing, the heart of the creeping dread that would eventually consume us all. It wasn't a heart, of course, but a tooth, a large, yellowed human molar that felt unnaturally heavy in the hand, dense as a river stone and just as smooth, save for the craggy peaks and valleys of its crown, a topography of some forgotten continent of pain. And it was my friend Leo who found it nestled in a small velvet-lined box alongside a bundle of love letters tied with a faded ribbon, the tooth sitting there like a misplaced punctuation mark in a sentence of sentiment. "This is metal," Leo had said, his voice a mix of revulsion and fascination as he held it up to the weak light filtering through the grimy attic window. And I remember the way it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a little nugget of captured midnight. We were skeptics, all of us, me, Leo, and Chloe, children of a rational scientific age, raised on documentaries debunking the paranormal. So the decision to use it was born more from a morbid curiosity than any real belief, a way to pass a humid Tuesday evening with cheap wine and a thrill. We set up in my grandmother's formal dining room, a place that still felt like her presence was imprinted on the air, the long, polished mahogany table cold beneath our elbows, the only light coming from a single candelabra we'd dug out of a cabinet, the flames casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to watch us with a keen, silent interest. The first touch of the tooth against the board was a jolt, a cold, greasy sensation that traveled up my fingertips and into my wrist, a feeling not of static electricity, but of something organic and old, like touching a slug or a piece of raw liver that had been left out too long. And I saw Chloe flinch, her eyes wide, but she didn't pull her fingers away. None of us did. Our collective pride a stronger force than the primal warning screaming in our nerves. Leo, ever the ringleader, asked the first question, his voice too loud in the quiet room. "Is anyone there?" And for a long moment, nothing happened, the tooth planchette sitting inert under our collective touch, a dead, heavy thing, and I felt a flicker of relief, a letdown that was also a comfort. But then it moved, a slow, deliberate drag across the board, not a skitter or a glide, but a pull, as if an invisible string was tied to it, and someone was reeling it in, the sound a dry, gritty scrape that set my teeth on edge, and it slid with a terrible, deliberate weight to yes. A charge went through the room, a silent, shared acknowledgement that the rules had just changed, that the world was not what we thought it was, and Leo, emboldened, asked, "What is your name?" And again that slow, grinding pull, the tooth moving with a purpose that felt entirely its own, spelling out letter by laborious letter, DNTSD. Chloe let out a nervous giggle, a sound that was quickly strangled in her throat. "The dentist? Seriously?" she whispered, but the name felt anything but silly in that atmosphere. It felt specific, professional, and all the more terrifying for it. Leo, never one to leave well enough alone, pushed further. "What do you want?" And the tooth didn't move for a second, just sat there humming with a faint, subaudible vibration, and then it spelled TOTH, and my blood ran cold, a literal chill that started at the base of my spine and spread outwards, icing my veins. "A tooth? What, like a fake one?" Leo asked, his bravado starting to crack around the edges, and the planchette shot to NO with a sudden, violent speed that made all of us jump, our fingers nearly losing contact, And then it spelled baby, and the relief was so palpable I almost laughed, the tension draining from my shoulders. A baby tooth? That seemed almost quaint, harmless, a relic of childhood that held no power. I think I have one, Chloe said, her voice small. My little brother lost one last week. My mom saved it in a little plastic baggie on the mantelpiece. It felt like a sign, a perfect, bloodless offering to this strange game we were playing. And so we broke the circle, the strange energy in the room dissipating like a sigh. And the next day, Chloe brought the tooth, a tiny, perfect little incisor, pearly white and innocent, nestled in a Ziploc bag. That night, we gathered again, the ritual feeling less like a game and more like a transaction, and we placed the baby tooth on the board, right in the center next to the planchette. And as soon as our fingers made contact with the heavy molar, the air in the room grew thick, heavy with a sense of anticipation, a predator scenting its prey. Leo asked, "We have your payment. Now, answer a question. Who will I marry?" It was a stupid teenage question, but the board responded with an alacrity that was frightening, spelling out a name, Srhle, a girl in our chemistry class that Leo had a crush on for years, a name he had never mentioned to us, and the specificity of it, the intimate knowledge, was the second jolt, the hook that set deep in our flesh. We were flush with success, giddy with a power we didn't understand, and over the next few weeks, it became our secret addiction, our dark little hobby. We'd scavenge for baby teeth, Chloe even going so far as to sneak into her neighbor's house during a barbecue to rifle through their daughter's keepsake box, returning with 2 small canines and a look of wild exhilaration mixed with shame on her face. And the dentist always paid its debts, providing answers that were unnervingly accurate. It told Chloe where her lost grandmother's ring was, tangled in the roots of the rose bush in her backyard. It warned Leo about his parents' impending divorce a week before the announcement. It gave me the answers to a history final I hadn't studied for. We were kings of a hidden world, privy to secrets that spun around us like invisible threads, and we ignored the growing cost. The way the questions started to feel heavier, the answers more laden with a grim finality. The shift was subtle at first. The dentist began requesting older specimens, and we, in our foolish greed, interpreted that as teeth from older children, which were harder to find, leading us down a path of petty theft and moral decay that should have been a warning in itself. Then one Tuesday the demand changed. The tooth planchette, after providing the name of the boy who had a crush on Chloe, a piece of information she had desperately wanted, did not go still. It lingered on goodbye for a moment, then dragged itself back to the center of the board and spelled out POYMENT, and then ADULTMOLAR. The air left the room. An adult molar? That wasn't a keepsake. That was a part of someone's body, a rooted, living thing. "No way," Leo said, his voice shaky. "We can't get that. That's insane." The planchette under our fingers grew cold, so cold it felt like it was burning our skin, a dry ice burn, and it moved to NO on its own, a single emphatic jerk. "It's saying no, we don't have a choice," Chloe whispered, her face pale in the candlelight. We broke the session, a sense of dread clinging to us like a foul odor, and for a week we tried to pretend it never happened, but the world had already shifted on its axis. It was Leo who broke first, calling me in a panic 3 days later. "My tooth," he stammered. "My lower left molar, it's loose." I went over to his house, and he let me feel it, my own fingertip pressing against the solid-looking tooth. And there it was, a tiny, almost imperceptible give, a wobble that had no business being there in the mouth of a healthy 17-year-old. The horror was no longer theoretical. It was physiological, a betrayal from within our own bodies. The next morning, he found it on his pillow, the molar, sitting in a small, rust-brown spot of blood, the roots long and jagged, looking like some grotesque, extracted starfish. He had paid the debt, and the dentist had collected. Our fear should have been the end of it, but the hook had been set too deep. The knowledge it offered was a drug, and we were addicts. We continued, our questions now darker, more desperate, trying to find a way out, asking about the dentist's nature, its purpose. The answers were fragmented, terrifying. It spoke of a CITY made of BONE, of structures that needed FOINDAKLNS. It was a builder, an architect in some unseen dimension, and our teeth were the bricks, the girders, the raw materials for its grotesque project. The demands escalated rapidly. Another molar, a premolar, an incisor. The payments were no longer something we found, they were something we lost. I woke up one morning with my front tooth so loose I could push it back and forth with my tongue, feeling the gritty grind of the root in its socket. A sensation so profoundly wrong it made me vomit into my bathroom sink, the bright yellow bile splashing against the white porcelain. A day later, it fell out while I was drinking water, tinking against the glass with a final, horrifying sound. I started finding teeth everywhere, not my own, but others. A canine, too large to be mine, in the pocket of my jeans. A wisdom tooth, still slick with tissue, at the bottom of my cereal bowl. Each one was a message, a receipt for a transaction I hadn't consciously authorized, a down payment on a question I hadn't yet asked. The horror was inescapable, a constant, grinding pressure in my jaw, a metallic taste of blood that became a permanent fixture in my mouth. The feeling that my very skeleton was being slowly, methodically deconstructed, repurposed for some awful architecture in a city of screams I could only imagine. The peak, the moment that broke the last vestige of my sanity, came last night. I had a dream, if you can call it that, a sensation of drowning not in water, but in something thick and saline, like the ocean had been concentrated into a single, suffocating volume, and I was at the bottom, pressure building in my sinuses, in my ears, behind my eyes. I felt a shifting in my throat, a deep, internal cracking, and I coughed, a wet, racking convulsion that propelled me out of the dream and into my bathroom, leaning over the sink, my body heaving. It wasn't a cough, it was an expulsion. Something solid and heavy shot up from my lungs, carried on a rush of that same saline, metallic water from my dream, splashing into the white basin. I gasped, sputtering, my eyes streaming, and when I looked down, there it was, resting in a pinkish puddle. A molar fully formed, but it was massive, twice the size of any tooth I'd ever seen. Its roots twisted into a strange, almost artistic spiral, and it was a shade of gray I associated with tombstones, veined with thin, black lines like cracks in old porcelain. It was unequivocally, terrifyingly not my own. It was a tooth from the collection, a piece of the dentist's grim inventory, and I had just coughed it up, a builder returning a faulty brick, or perhaps adding a new, specialized component to the project. I can feel it now, even as I sit here writing this, a pressure not just in my jaw, but throughout my entire skull, a constant low-frequency hum that seems to resonate with the very foundations of the house, a sense of something vast and alien being constructed just on the other side of a veil I can no longer see, but can feel pressing against my face. The dentist is nearly finished. I know this with a certainty that goes beyond bone deep. The questions have stopped. It no longer needs the barter, not when it can simply take, when the connection is so solidified that my body is now a direct conduit, a quarry for its final, critical components. I can feel the slow, inexorable loosening of my remaining molars, the subtle shift of my jawbone itself, and I know, with a dread that is my only constant companion, that I am not just a source anymore. I am becoming part of the blueprint, my own skeleton, the final donation to a city of bone whose streets I will never walk, but whose foundations I am forever, horrifyingly, a part of. The hum has become a physical presence now, a vibration that starts in the fillings of my teeth and travels down into the marrow of my bones, a constant reminder that the transaction is perpetual and I am the defaulting debtor. I can't eat solid food anymore. My diet is a pathetic slurry of meal replacement shakes and thin broth that I suck through a straw placed carefully at the back of my mouth, avoiding the treacherous landscape of my own gums. Every slight movement, every accidental click of a tooth against the plastic, sends a jolt of electric terror through me, a premonition of another piece of me giving way. Leo is gone. His parents moved him out of state after he was found cowering in his closet, his mouth a bloody ruin, babbling about ivory towers and root canals that stretched into eternity. Chloe. I saw her one last time, through the window of her house, her face gaunt and pale, her hand constantly cupped over her jaw, and when our eyes met, there was no recognition, only a flat, empty horror, like two windows looking into a house that had been completely emptied. I am alone with this, the sole remaining tenant in a body that is being foreclosed upon, and the eviction notice is being written in the slow, grinding collapse of my own anatomy. The dreams are no longer of drowning, but of construction, vast, shadowy scaffolds rising against a bruised purple sky, the clanging not of metal but of countless teeth knocking together in a sickening symphony. And I am both the spectator and the building material, feeling myself being mortared into a wall, the gritty substance between the bricks the same as the dust I find on my pillow every morning. I found the jar yesterday, though I don't remember looking for it. It was just there, sitting in the center of the attic floor where we first began, a simple glass mason jar. But inside, swirling in a cloudy, yellowish fluid, was a collection of teeth, hundreds of them, in all shapes and sizes, from tiny baby incisors to large, worn molars, and they were all moving, slowly tumbling over one another in a silent, churning dance. The lid was labeled in a spidery, familiar script that I recognized from my grandmother's gardening notes. For the collection. This was the reservoir, the stockpile, and seeing it made me understand the scale of it all, that the dentist's work was vast, and we were not its first, nor would we be its last, suppliers. The knowledge is a weight that crushes my lungs more effectively than any saline flood. This morning, I ran my tongue over my canines and felt a distinct wobble in the left one. A telltale give that signifies a new demand is about to be met. A withdrawal is imminent. There is no question pending, no request for knowledge. This is pure taxation, a levy for simply being a part of its design. The pressure in my jaw has intensified, becoming a constant, dull ache that blooms into sharp, stabbing pains at random intervals, as if something is testing the integrity of the roots, checking for weak spots before the final extraction. I can feel the architecture of my face changing, a subtle sagging on one side, a hollowing under my cheekbone that wasn't there last week. I am the quarry and the construction site, the source and the structure, and the final chilling realization is that the dentist isn't just building a city of bones somewhere out there. It is building something in here, using my body as its workshop, repurposing my skeleton in real time. And the cough that brought up that foreign molar was not a rejection, but an installation, a fitting, and I know, with a certainty that is my only truth now, that the next thing I cough up will not be a tooth, but a cornerstone, and after that there will be no more me, just a vacant lot where a person used to be, and the endless, grinding sound of construction that will finally, mercifully, be coming from the outside. The cornerstone, I know its arrival is imminent, a truth that sits in my gut with the cold, hard certainty of a stone itself, and the pressure has localized now, a focused, unbearable ache deep in the sinus cavity above my right canine, a tooth that now hangs by what feels like a single frayed nerve thread, tapping a faint, irregular Morse code against its loosening neighbor whenever I dare to swallow. The humming has tuned itself to a specific frequency, one that resonates with the empty socket where my front tooth used to be, a high-pitched whine that seems to drill directly into my prefrontal cortex, scattering my thoughts until all that remains is the primal, animal awareness of the slow-motion collapse happening within the cage of my skull. I tried to leave, yesterday, a final, desperate surge of self-preservation that had me packing a single bag with shaking hands, throwing in the jar of teeth without even understanding why, as if it were a crucial part of me I couldn't leave behind. But I only made it as far as the front porch before the world tilted. A vertigo so profound it felt like the gravity of the entire planet had been recalibrated to pin me specifically to this spot, to this house, and a warm, coppery gush of blood filled my mouth from a dozen tiny, inexplicable gum fissures, a warning hemorrhage that told me in no uncertain terms that my role as the active site was non-negotiable. I am tethered here, a goat staked out for a predator that doesn't need to consume me, only my parts. The dreams have merged with waking reality, a constant, low-grade hallucination where the walls of my grandmother's house sometimes appear not as faded floral wallpaper, but as vast, curved expanses of dentin and enamel, the patterns resolving into countless tiny, screaming faces before dissolving back into roses. And the wind outside doesn't sound like wind anymore, but like a collective, windy sigh through a forest of skeletal trees. I spend my days now mostly in the dining room, at the table where it all began, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood that I sometimes imagine is the striated root of some colossal, buried tooth, and the planchette molar sits before me, no longer needing my touch to feel alive, its yellowed surface seeming to pulse with a slow, sullen light, a dormant beacon waiting for its counterpart to be delivered. The taste in my mouth is no longer just blood. It's the taste of mortar and chalk, of crushed bone and something antiseptic, like a dentist's office from a childhood nightmare. I can feel the structures shifting inside me, not just my teeth but the very bones of my face, my palate feeling wider, flatter, as if being prepared to serve as a foundation slab, the zygomatic arch under my eye feeling thinner, more graceful, like it's being carved into a decorative finial. I am being drafted, my biological blueprint overwritten by an architectural one I cannot comprehend, and the final, suffocating terror is the realization that I am not being killed, I am being repurposed, and a sliver of my consciousness, the part that currently screams and trembles, might be preserved within the latticework, a sentient brick in a silent, screaming city, forever aware of my own grotesque utility. The pressure in my sinus is building to a crescendo, a tectonic shift preparing for its seismic release, and I know I have minutes, maybe seconds, before the cough comes, the great, heaving expulsion that will tear the cornerstone from whatever organic workshop it's being forged in within me and deliver it onto the waiting board. And when it does, the last of my structural integrity will go with it, and I will finally see from the inside what it is that the dentist, with its brutal, meticulous economy, has been building all this time. And my only hope, a pathetic, whimpering prayer, is that the process of being mortared into that eternal silence will finally, blessedly, drown out this endless, grinding hum. The waiting is a form of torture in itself, a drawn-out, excruciating prelude to a catastrophe I can no longer postpone, and the pressure in my sinus has become a living thing, a second, parasitic brain growing behind my face, pulsing with a rhythm that is not my own heartbeat but the slow, deliberate cadence of some distant, monstrous construction. I can feel its edges now, the cornerstone, not as a vague premonition but as a solid, geometric mass lodged high in the cavity above my teeth, a shape with angles and facets that grate against the delicate bone with every shallow, terrified breath I take, and the taste has evolved from chalk and mortar to something sharper, more metallic and electric, like licking the terminals of a battery while standing in a field of rusted iron filings. My reflection in the dark screen of the television is a stranger's face, a gaunt mask with sunken, shadowed eyes and a jawline that seems to be subtly receding, as if the underlying architecture is being carefully dismantled beam by beam, and my remaining teeth have taken on a faint, phosphorescent glow in the low light, a sickly yellow-green that reminds me of the jar's contents. And I understand now that the jar wasn't just a collection. It was a battery, a stored potential that I have now been wired into, completing a circuit that has been waiting for its final, critical connection. The hum is no longer a sound I hear, but a vibration I am, a fundamental resonance that has replaced the quiet thrum of my own biology, and it's pulling a constant, insistent tugging sensation deep within my marrow, drawing me not downward but inward, toward that focal point of pressure behind my face, a gravitational collapse centered on my own skull. I can't speak anymore, my tongue a heavy, useless slab of meat that feels too large for a mouth that is itself shrinking, the soft palate hardening into a ridged, bony plate, and when I try to scream, the only sound that emerges is a dry, rattling click, the sound of two small stones being knocked together. The planchette molar on the table before me has begun to rotate slowly, clockwise, a lazy, unnerving spin without any visible force propelling it. And as it turns, I feel a corresponding, grinding rotation inside my sinus, the cornerstone aligning itself, finding its true orientation for the journey out. This is it, the final withdrawal, the last transaction that will zero out my account and leave me as an empty property, a vacant lot in the geography of my own body. The urge to cough is no longer an urge. It is a command issued from a place deeper than my spine, an imperative written into my DNA, and my body is arching forward of its own volition, my hands gripping the edge of the table as my diaphragm seizes in a series of violent, uncontrollable spasms. There is no air, only the sensation of a great internal ocean, that same saline water from my dream, churning and rising to carry its precious, terrible cargo up and out, and my vision is tunneling, the world narrowing to the dark, waiting maw of the planchette on the board, and I know, with a final crystalline moment of utter dread, that this is not an expulsion, it is a delivery, and I am both the courier and the package, the mother and the child, and as the pressure finally, catastrophically, breaks, and the first gush of metallic fluid floods my mouth, I have just enough time to realize that the cornerstone is not a tooth at all, but a keystone, and its placement will not end the construction, but will finally, fully lock me into it, and the scream that has been building in my soul for weeks finally finds its voice, not through my throat, but through the grinding, eternal architecture that is now, and forever my tomb. Story number 2. It all started with the kind of petty, simmering resentment that festers in the fluorescent-lit purgatory of a modern office, a low-grade hum of hatred for my boss, Mr. Hemlock, a man whose very name felt like a poison, and whose presence was a constant, draining weight on my soul. He was a petty tyrant in a cheap suit, a master of the backhanded compliment and the stolen idea, and that particular Tuesday had been the worst yet, a masterpiece of managerial cruelty where he'd taken credit for. My 6-month project publicly eviscerated me for a typo in the appendix, and then, with a syrupy smile, demanded I work through the weekend to correct my lack of attention to detail. I drove home that evening with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the heat of shame and rage burning in my cheeks, replaying every condescending word in an endless, maddening loop, and when I finally stumbled into my silent, dark apartment, the loneliness I usually fought off with television and takeout felt absolute, a void that seemed to echo only with his voice. It was in that state, a perfect cocktail of exhaustion and seething fury, that I found myself pulling the old cardboard box from the back of my closet, the one that had been my grandmother's, a relic I'd always treated as a curious antique and not a thing of actual power. The Ouija board inside was simple, painted wood, with its sun and moon corners and its stark, black alphabet, and the planchette was heart-shaped, its little felt feet worn smooth with age. I don't know what I expected, a laugh, a cheap thrill, a way to mock the darkness I felt closing in. So I set it on my coffee table, lit a single candle more for atmosphere than ritual, and placed my fingers lightly on the plastic slider, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me, a tangible thing. At first, nothing happened, just the faint sound of my own breathing and the distant sigh of traffic, and I felt foolish, a grown man seeking answers from a piece of mass-produced cardboard. But then a subtle tension entered my fingertips, a coolness that seemed to seep up from the board itself, and the planchette gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shudder. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone, but I didn't pull away. I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper in the gloom, "Is anyone there?" The movement was immediate and shockingly strong, a confident, smooth glide that carried my fingers with an undeniable force I wasn't generating, sliding from yes to the sun emblem at the top of the board, a gesture that felt like a greeting or a confirmation of a connection made. A jolt, both electric and icy, shot up my arms, and the air in the room grew thick, charged with a static energy that made the hairs on my neck stand erect. The candle flame guttered, not from any draft I could feel, but as if something had passed through it, and a scent, faint and metallic like ozone after a lightning strike, filled my nostrils. I asked who it was I was speaking to, and the planchette moved again, spelling out a word that made my blood run cold. Custodin. The entity, for I could think of it as nothing else now, explained its purpose not in words I heard with my ears, but in concepts that bloomed directly in my mind, a silent, insidious download of information. It told me reality was not a solid, fixed thing, but a fluid, cluttered tapestry woven from memory and perception, and that it, the custodian, was a filter, a purifier whose sole function was to remove the impurities that clouded our understanding, the unnecessary complications and toxic influences that caused pain and suffering. It spoke of a process of cleansing, of creating a clearer, purer reality, and the idea, in my addled, hate-filled state, was seductive, a divine intervention offered in the depths of my despair. The planchette then slid to a question that seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implication. What impurity would you have me remove? And in that moment, drowning in my own powerlessness, the name came to my lips without a second thought, a hissed exhalation of all my pent-up venom. Hemlock. Jonathan Hemlock. The moment the name left my mouth, the planchette shot to goodbye, with such violent speed that it flew from under my fingers and skittered off the board onto the floor, and the connection severed with a palpable snap, the oppressive energy in the room dissipating instantly, leaving only the normal silence of my apartment and the frantic beating of my own heart. I felt an immediate and profound sense of wrongness, a queasy lurch in my stomach as if I'd just swallowed something rotten, but I chalked it up to adrenaline and guilt, laughing shakily to myself as I packed the board away, telling myself it was a stupid game, a psychological trick I'd played on my own stressed-out mind, and I went to bed trying to forget the whole bizarre episode, falling into a fitful sleep haunted by dreams of shifting walls and faceless figures. The next morning, I arrived at work braced for another confrontation, my shoulders tight with anticipated tension, but the office was calm. Unnervingly so. I walked past Hemlock's corner office, its blinds open, and saw it was empty, the desk clear, the chair tucked in neatly. A strange relief washed over me, thinking he was just out sick or in a meeting, but as the morning wore on, no one mentioned him. His name didn't appear in my inbox. The usual, grating stream of emails from him was simply absent. By lunchtime, a low-grade anxiety had begun to buzz under my skin. I casually asked Sarah at the next cubicle if she knew when Mr. Hemlock was coming in, and she gave me a blank, slightly confused look. "Who?" she asked, and a cold finger traced its way down my spine. I stammered, "Jonathan Hemlock, our boss," and she just shook her head, a small, polite smile on her face. "You must be thinking of another department, Mark. Our team reports directly to regional management. Always have." I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. This wasn't a joke. Her confusion was genuine, a complete and utter absence of recognition. I walked back to my desk, my legs feeling numb, and my eyes fell on the team photo mounted on the partition wall, taken just a month ago at the company picnic. There we all were, smiling in the sun, Sarah, Dave, Chloe, me, and next to me, where Hemlock should have been standing, his hand clapping my shoulder in a gesture that had felt patronizing at the time, there was now only a blur, a smeared patch of green grass and blue sky, as if the camera had malfunctioned or someone had taken an eraser to the film and rubbed him out. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled gasp. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely type, and searched for his name in my contacts. Nothing. My call history, once filled with his number, showed no record of our last angry conversation. A frantic search through my emails yielded the same terrifying result. Every single email, every attached file, every meeting invite he had ever sent was gone, vanished as if they had never been. The digital footprint of the man had been completely scrubbed away. I felt a scream building in my chest, a pressure of pure, unadulterated terror, but I choked it down, forcing myself to appear normal in this suddenly alien landscape where I was the only one who remembered a fundamental piece of our shared reality. I drove to his house that evening, a colonial and a neat suburb I'd been to once for a mandatory holiday party, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. But when I rang the bell, a woman I didn't recognize answered, a young child peering out from behind her legs. I asked for Jonathan Hemlock, and she looked at me with polite pity, saying the previous owners, the Millers, had moved out over a year ago, and they'd bought the house from them. She had never heard of anyone named Hemlock. I stood there on her porch, the foundation of my world crumbling beneath my feet, the warm, lived in light from her home, feeling like a mockery of the absolute erasure that had taken place. He was gone. Not dead. Unwritten. The custodian hadn't killed him. It had deleted him, retroactively, from the very fabric of existence, and I was the sole, terrified witness, a glitch in the system, a living repository for a memory that no longer had any anchor in reality. The following nights were a special kind of hell, a waking nightmare of isolation and dread. I couldn't tell anyone, couldn't confess what I had done, because to them, there was nothing to confess. I was just a man babbling about a person who had never been, and the more I tried to grasp at the shreds of Hemlock's existence, the more they disintegrated in my hands. I found a sticky note in an old notebook where I'd scrawled Hemlock Q3 projections, but the name was fading, the ink turning a faint, rusty brown as if aged decades in a matter of days. My own memory, the one thing I thought I could trust, began to feel slippery, the sharp edges of his face, the precise timbre of his voice, starting to soften and blur, and I fought against it, clutching at the hatred I'd felt for him like a life raft, because that emotion, that visceral, ugly truth, was the only proof I had left that he was real. It was during this descent into near madness that I felt the pull, a cold, magnetic draw from the closet where the board was stored, a silent, psychic summons I could feel in my teeth. I resisted for 2 days, but the compulsion grew stronger, a constant, whispering pressure at the back of my skull, and finally, broken and desperate for answers, I took it out again. The moment my fingers touched the planchette, the connection was instantaneous and far more aggressive than before. The slider didn't glide, it jerked across the board, spelling out its message with a furious, impatient energy. You remain clouded. The filtration is incomplete. You must provide more impurities. The entity's voice, in my mind, was no longer the calm, helpful purifier. It was hungry, demanding, a predator tasting blood. I stammered, my voice trembling. What happens if I don't? The planchette didn't move to the letters. Instead, it shot directly to a single word, the plastic base cracking under the strain. Consumption. And then, with a chilling clarity, the final, horrifying piece of the deception fell into place in my mind. This wasn't about cleansing my reality, it was about feeding. The board was a parasite, and the souls, the lives, the memories it erased were its sustenance, the energy it harvested to maintain its own existence across whatever bleak dimension it inhabited. I had been the delivery boy for its meal, and now it was demanding another course. The entity's presence filled the room, a suffocating weight of ancient, bottomless hunger. Name another, it commanded, the planchette grinding into the wood. Your turn is coming. Provide sustenance or become sustenance. I tore my hands away, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and shoved the board back into its box, but the damage was done. The threat was now a living thing inside me, a cancer of fear. I was trapped in an impossible moral agony. Condemn another innocent person to the void, to be unmade from history, or face that fate myself, to be devoured and forgotten, my own existence snipped out of the timeline like a loose thread. For a week, I lived in a state of perpetual terror, jumping at shadows, avoiding human connection, terrified that a stray thought or a moment of frustration might lead me to utter a name and seal someone's fate. But the pressure from the board was constant, a psychic whine that frayed my nerves and shattered my sleep, and worse, I began to notice the first signs of my own unraveling. It started small. I reached for my favorite coffee mug, a chipped blue ceramic thing my sister had given me, and my hand passed straight through it, the solid object flickering like a bad hologram for a split second before stabilizing. I'd be talking to a co-worker, and a word would vanish from my vocabulary mid-sentence, leaving me gaping like a fish. A childhood memory of learning to ride a bike, once vivid and warm, now had a hole in it where my father's face should be, his encouraging words replaced by a dull, empty silence. The erasure was contagious, a virus, and I was patient zero. The custodian was no longer waiting. It was beginning to feed on me. This realization culminated in the peak moment of my personal terror, the event that shattered any last vestige of hope or denial. I was in my bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to shock myself back to some semblance of sanity, when I happened to glance up into the mirror. For a second, everything was normal. My own tired, frightened face stared back at me, the familiar landscape of my features a small comfort in the chaos. Then I saw it, just above my left eyebrow. A patch of my reflection, about the size of a quarter, was simply missing. It wasn't a blur, like in the photograph. It was a perfect, absolute void, a patch of non-reflection that showed only the blank white wall behind me, a smear of static nothingness where my own forehead and a lock of my hair should have been. A cold, existential dread, far beyond any simple fear of death, flooded my system, turning my blood to ice. I cried out, a raw, animal sound, and my reflection's mouth moved in perfect, silent unison. I reached up, my fingers frantically rubbing at the spot on my own brow, feeling the solid, real skin there, but in the mirror, the void remained, a hole in my image, a preview of my own impending non-existence. I watched, hypnotized by horror, as the static smear slowly, inexorably, began to expand, creeping like frost over a window pane, consuming the memory of me, one pixel at a time. I was being edited out of reality, and the editor was getting impatient. That brings me to now, to this moment, the board laid out before me on the floor, the candle flickering in the oppressive stillness of my apartment, which itself feels less substantial with every passing second, the colors leaching out of the walls, the sounds from the street outside growing muffled as if through a thickening pane of glass. The planchette sits dormant, but I can feel the custodian's presence coiling around me, a serpent of pure hunger, its demand a constant, screaming pressure inside my skull. A name. Give me a name. My left hand has started to flicker at the edges, my fingers becoming translucent, and I know with a cold, certain finality that I have minutes, maybe seconds, before the process becomes irreversible and I am consumed, unmade, my 30 years of life rendered down into nothing more than fuel for this cosmic parasite. I have a list of names in my head, people who have wronged me, people who are impurities in my world, the landlord who cheated me, the friend who betrayed a confidence, and the entity whispers each one to me, tempting me, showing me how easy it would be, how the fading would stop, how I could live, a monster sparing myself by sacrificing another. But I also see the blur in the photograph. I see the confused, empty look in Sarah's eyes. I feel the ghost of a man I hated, but who deserved to exist. And I know I cannot do it. I cannot become this thing's accomplice, its farmer of souls. There is one other option, a final, desperate act that has formed in the last clear corner of my mind, a way to break the cycle or be utterly destroyed by it. With a trembling, half-substantial hand, I reach out and place my flickering fingers on the planchette, the connection sizzling with a malevolent glee, the entity expecting its offering. I take a deep, shuddering breath, the last full breath of a whole man, and I speak a single name into the heavy, waiting silence, not the name of an enemy, or a friend, or a stranger, but the one name I have the absolute right to give, the final, terrible impurity I wish to see cleansed from this broken world. I say my own name. For a heartbeat, there is absolute stillness, a vacuum of sound and sense, and then the board erupts in a blinding flash of black light, a light that doesn't illuminate but devours illumination, and the custodian's shriek of fury and surprise is not a sound in the air, but a tear in the fabric of my mind, a wave of pure, psychic rage that smashes into me as I feel the planchette, cold as the void between stars, slam onto the word, goodbye, and the world, my world, begins not to fade but to violently, catastrophically, and irrevocably and unravel all at once, the very air cracking like shattered glass as the entity's rage becomes a physical force, a hurricane confined to my apartment that tears at the fading edges of my being, the planchette burning with a cold so intense it feels like fire against my dissolving fingertips, and I can feel the custodian not as a distant presence but as a colossal, starving maw closing in around me, furious at my defiance, this act of self-sacrifice. A poison to its system, a paradox it cannot easily digest. The single, continuous paragraph of my existence is being scrubbed out, the words themselves turning to dust as I scream without a sound, my voice erased before it can leave my lips, my past being pulled out from under me like a rug, memories of my first kiss, my mother's laugh, the feel of summer rain, all of it dissolving into static, into the white noise of non-being. But in this final, catastrophic confrontation, as the black light from the board consumes the room and the walls themselves begin to waver like a mirage, I realize something, a tiny, desperate spark in the overwhelming darkness. By naming myself, I have not given it a clean, simple meal. I have given it a host. The parasitic filter, designed to consume from a distance, is now forced to directly interface with the very soul it seeks to harvest, and my consciousness, my stubborn, terrified I, is flooding into its circuitry, a chaotic, emotional virus invading a sterile, hungry machine. I am not just being erased. I am being absorbed, and in that absorption, I can feel its endless, simple hunger, but I can also feel its structure, the vast, cold architecture of its being, and I can feel a flaw, a crack in its foundation born from this unexpected, recursive consumption. With the last shred of my will, a will that is no longer anchored in a brain or a body but in the raw, screaming fact of my existence, I don't fight the pull. I lean into it, I pour myself into that crack, not as sustenance, but as a weapon. I fill its pristine, hungry void with the messy, painful, beautiful impurities it sought to cleanse. I flood it with the memory of Hemlock's smug smile, with the sound of my father's lost voice, with the taste of blood from a childhood fall, with the crushing weight of my loneliness and the searing heat of my rage, all the chaotic data of a human life, and for a single, universe-shattering moment, the custodian's endless hunger stutters, overwhelmed by the very thing it devours, its purpose corrupted by the complexity of a soul it cannot possibly comprehend. The shriek becomes a feedback loop of agony, the black light flaring and then collapsing inward, and I feel a snap, a fundamental breaking point, as the board itself splinters, the wood cracking down the middle with a sound like a dying star, and the connection is severed with a final, violent jolt that throws what is left of me back into a world that is no longer my own. I am lying on my floor, but the floor is wrong. The grain of the wood is different. The color of the paint on the walls is a shade I have never seen, and when I push myself up, my hands are solid, but they are not entirely my hands. The scar from a childhood accident on my right knuckle is gone, and I feel a phantom ache in a tooth I never had filled. I stumble to the bathroom, my heart a wild drum in a chest that feels both familiar and alien, and I look into the mirror. My reflection is whole, no void, no static, but the face that stares back at me is different around the edges. The eyes hold a history I don't remember, and when I try to recall my mother's name, it comes to me instantly. But it is a name I have never heard before. The Ouija board is gone, not just put away, but gone from existence. Its box vanished from the closet, and when I frantically search my phone, there is no record of my employment at the company, no photos of co-workers I spent years with. And the city outside my window has a skyline I do not recognize, with a strange, spiral tower piercing the clouds where the old bank building should be. The custodian is gone, destroyed or banished by the recursive blast of its own consumption, but it did not die alone. It took my world with it. I did not simply break the cycle, I shattered the timeline. I am a ghost, not fading, but displaced, a living error in a new, corrected reality. A man who sacrificed himself and yet somehow survived, but survived as a palimpsest, my original life scraped away and written over with this new, unknown text. I am free from the entity's hunger, but I am trapped in a world that is not mine, a world where Jonathan Hemlock was never born, a world where the company I worked for never existed, a world where I am a stranger to my own history, and the ultimate, chilling truth settles over me. A truth more terrifying than any erasure. I am rememberer of a world that no longer is, and the silence in this new, impure reality is not the silence of peace, but the silence of a story that has been permanently and irrevocably edited, and I am the only one who knows the paragraph that was deleted. And this new silence is a living thing, a constant, low hum of wrongness that vibrates in my teeth and follows me through the streets of this alien yet familiar city. A place built on the grave of my own past. My apartment key still works, but the lock is different. a sleek silver thing instead of the old brass one, and the groceries in my fridge are brands I've never seen. Their packaging bright and garish in a way that hurts my eyes. I still have a bank account, but the balance is wrong. The transaction's a list of purchases for items I don't own from stores I've never visited, and my own signature on file looks like a forgery, the loops and lines shaped by a hand with a different set of memories. I am a ghost haunting my own life, a glitch in the code of this pristine, filtered reality, and the weight of being the sole keeper of a truth that has been physically excised from the universe is a crushing, solitary burden. I try to find anchors, anything to tether this new version of me to the old one, but every path leads to a dead end or a rewritten history. The small, independent coffee shop where I bought my blue mug is now a sterile pharmacy. And when I called the number I remember from my sister, a stranger's voice answered, sharp and suspicious, telling me I had the wrong number before hanging up. The phantom ache in my tooth throbs in time with my panic, a constant reminder that my very body is no longer entirely my own, that the custodian's filtration process didn't just clean the world around me. It attempted to clean me, to overwrite my impurities with this smoother, simpler narrative, and it failed, but not without leaving its scars. I catch my reflection in shop windows and I flinch, because the man staring back is a stranger wearing my face, his eyes holding a quiet confidence I never possessed, his posture straight in a way mine never was, and I am consumed by a terrifying question. Who am I in this world? What history did this shell of mine live through? The urge to know is a sickness, a desperate need to understand the new text written over my erased life. So I spend days in the public library, scrolling through digital archives of newspapers, searching for my own name, and what I find steals the breath from my lungs. Here, in this timeline, I exist. There are records, a birth certificate, a diploma from a university I never attended, a marriage license to a woman named Clara, with a smiling photograph of this other me, this confident, whole man, his arm around a beautiful stranger, both of them glowing with a happiness I have never known. The date on the license is 2 years ago. I am married. I have a life, a full, complete life, with a wife, a home, a history, all of it built on the hollowed-out foundation of my true self. The horror of it is absolute, a profound violation that makes the simple erasure of hemlock seem merciful. I am not just a ghost. I am an imposter in my own skin, a cuckoo in a nest I didn't build. I leave the library, my legs weak, the world swimming around me, and I find myself standing outside a charming little house with a well-kept garden, the address listed on the marriage license. I watch from across the street, hidden by the shade of a large oak tree, as a woman, Clara, comes out to water the flowers. She is humming, and the tune is faintly familiar, a childhood lullaby my mother used to sing, but the words in my head don't fit the melody here. Then the front door opens, and he walks out. The other me. He is wearing clothes I would never choose, a crisp, bright polo shirt and khaki shorts, and he walks with an easy, athletic grace that is entirely foreign to me. He smiles at Clara, a warm, open smile, and he kisses her, a deep, familiar kiss that speaks of a shared life, of shared nights and mornings, and the jealousy that rips through me is so violent and unexpected that I have to clutch the tree trunk to stay upright. I am jealous of myself. This man has everything that was taken from me, a past, a present, a future, a love. He has my face, but he is living a life that is a polished, impurity-free version of my own, a life the custodian would have approved of, and I realize with dawning, soul-crushing certainty that the entity didn't just fail to consume me. It created a replacement, a backup copy, a filtered mark to inhabit the world it had cleaned. I am the original, flawed manuscript, and he is the published, sanitized bestseller. I watch them for an hour, until they go inside, their laughter trailing behind them, and the sound is like shards of glass in my ears. I am trapped in a nightmare more intricate and cruel than I could have ever imagined. I cannot reveal myself to Clara, to this world. I would be seen as a madman, a doppelganger, a monster. I cannot reclaim this life, because it was never mine to begin with. I am a remnant, a fossil from a deleted epoch, and the only thing left for me to do is to walk away from the house, from the smiling, whole man who is me but is not me, and disappear into the cracks of this new, wrong world, forever alone, forever remembering the beautiful, messy, and pure reality that was lost, a living tombstone for a timeline that no longer exists, carrying the unbearable weight of a story that I can never, ever tell. The days bled into a monochrome haze of observation and a gnawing, parasitic grief that fed on my own stolen memories. I became a specter haunting the edges of my own life, a permanent tourist in a city built from the ashes of my past. I rented a cramped, anonymous room in a part of town I'd never frequented, paying with the strange, new currency from my inexplicably funded bank account, each transaction feeling like a theft from the man I was supposed to be. My existence narrowed to a single grim purpose, to watch him, the other Mark, the filtered copy. I learned his routines, the cadence of this new, polished life. He left for work at 8:15 sharp, not with the harried, coffee-stained desperation I remembered, but with a calm, purposeful stride. He worked as a graphic designer for a firm I'd never heard of, a job that required creativity and order, a far cry from the soul-crushing corporate drudgery I had known. On Saturdays, he and Clara would visit the farmer's market, their woven basket filling with vibrant produce, their interactions a seamless ballet of shared jokes and gentle touches. I watched them from behind piles of kale, my own hands shoved deep into the pockets of a jacket that felt like a costume, the phantom ache in my tooth a constant, mocking reminder of my own dislocation. I saw them host dinner parties, their friends spilling out onto the porch, their laughter a sound that was both welcoming and violently exclusionary. These people, their friends, had memories that included this other Mark. They had inside jokes and shared histories that were completely real to them. A whole tapestry of experiences woven with a thread that was a pale imitation of my own soul. The most terrifying realization, the one that coiled in my gut like a snake, was that his life was better. It was cleaner, happier, more orderly. It was the life the custodian had promised, a reality purified of the grit and pain and random cruelty that had defined my own. Hemlock was gone, and with him, the daily humiliations. The loneliness that had festered in my old apartment was replaced, in this version, by Clara's warm presence. The custodian hadn't just erased my boss, it had erased my entire context for suffering, and in doing so, it had created a man who was fundamentally not me. A man who had never been broken enough to need a Ouija board in a moment of blind, stupid rage. I was the impurity it had failed to fully scrub away. One rain-slicked evening, watching them through their living room window, the glow of their lamp a cruel mockery of the cold darkness I inhabited, I saw him, the other me, get up and walk to a bookshelf. He pulled down a familiar, worn cardboard box. My heart stopped, a frozen lump in my chest. It was my grandmother's box. In this timeline, it still existed. He carried it to the coffee table, and Clara came to sit beside him, her expression one of fond curiosity, not the desperate frustration that had driven me. He opened it. Inside was not the Ouija board. It was a set of vintage wooden dominoes. He spilled them out, and they began to play, the soft clatter of the tiles a sound of simple, domestic contentment. I stumbled away from the window, the rain soaking through my clothes, the cold a welcome numbness against the deeper chill inside. The board was gone, truly gone, not just from my closet, but from this entire timeline, its evil replaced by an innocent pastime. I was the only remaining relic of its horror. I found myself walking, aimlessly, for hours, until I stood before the door of my old apartment building, or what should have been my old building. It was now a sleek, modern complex with a security keypad and a uniformed doorman. There was no entry for me here. My past was not just forgotten, it was architecturally impossible. I was utterly unmoored. The compulsion to interact, to somehow bridge the chasm between my reality and this one, became an obsession. I started leaving things for him, small, anonymous messages. I mailed a postcard with a picture of the old, demolished bank building, writing on the back, "Do you remember this?" I left a single chipped blue ceramic mug, a duplicate I'd found in a thrift store, on their porch step. I needed to see a crack in his perfect facade, a flicker of the shared, true memory that only I possessed. Days later, I saw him retrieve the mug from the porch. He held it, turning it over in his hands, a slight frown on his face. Clara came out, took it from him, and after a moment she laughed, a light, airy sound. "Oh, that's cute," she said. "It must be from that new vintage place on Elm. They do monograms." She took it inside, and I watched, helpless, as my most potent symbol of loss was effortlessly absorbed and sanitized by their world, stripped of all its history and pain, becoming just another quaint object in their curated life. It was the final, crushing proof of my irrelevance. That night, back in my barren room, I looked in the small, tarnished mirror above the sink. The face that stared back was a palimpsest of two lives. It was my face, the original, marked by attention and a sorrow the other Mark would never know. But it was also subtly shifting, the features sometimes seeming to soften, to align more with the confident, untroubled man I watched daily. The phantom toothache was gone, replaced by a new, faint memory of a root canal I never had, performed by a dentist named Dr. Albright. The erosion was not of my body, but of my mind, of my very self. This new reality was a slow-acting acid, dissolving my authentic memories and replacing them with its own clean, bright lies. I was being assimilated, not through a violent, supernatural erasure, but through the quiet, insistent pressure of a world that refused to acknowledge my truth. I was becoming a ghost even to myself. I knew then that I couldn't stay. I couldn't bear to watch myself be slowly rewritten, to see the last vestiges of the man who had spoken to the custodian smoothed away into this pleasant, happy stranger. I had to go somewhere this other Mark did not exist, somewhere I could be the only version, even if that version was broken and wrong. I withdrew a large sum of cash from the bank account that wasn't mine, a final act of theft from my doppelganger, and I bought a bus ticket to a distant, anonymous city, a place with no history for either of us. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked out the rain-streaked window one last time, and I saw him, the other Mark, walking hand in hand with Clara under a single umbrella, their figures blurred and beautiful in the twilight, a perfect picture from a life I was never meant to have. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that I was not escaping my fate. I was merely carrying it with me, a solitary, fading echo in a world that had already written its happy ending, an ending that had surgically removed me, the original flaw, the first and final impurity, from its pages forever. Story number 3. It began not with a fear of the unknown, but with the bored curiosity that festered in the stagnant air of a rainy Sunday afternoon, the kind of idleness that makes teenagers do stupid things, the kind that makes you rummage through your grandmother's attic and find the old cardboard box tucked away behind the Christmas decorations, a box that smelled of dust and mothballs and something else, something faintly metallic and sweetly rotten that I couldn't quite place, but now recognize as the scent of time itself curdling. And inside that box was the board, not some commercially produced Parker Brothers game with bright colors and a friendly-looking sun, but something far older, its paper surface yellowed and brittle at the edges, the letters of the alphabet faded but still legible, the numbers a ghostly imprint, the words yes and no staring up from the corners like sightless eyes, and the planchette, a heart-shaped piece of wood with a cloudy, smeared plastic window that felt unnaturally cold to the touch, a cold that seeped into your fingertips and seemed to travel up your arm, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the attic. I brought it down to my bedroom where my friends Leo and Chloe were waiting, Leo with his skeptical smirk that never quite reached his eyes, and Chloe who hugged a cushion to her chest, her inherent nervousness a fragile, palpable thing in the room. And we lit a single candle, because someone in a movie once did that, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to watch us from the corners. And we placed our fingers lightly on that cold, heart-shaped piece of wood, our fingertips just barely touching, a circuit of naive intent. And I, feeling like a fool, asked the empty air if there was anyone there who wished to communicate with us. And for a long moment there was nothing but the drumming of the rain on the roof and the soft, wet sound of our own breathing. And then the planchette began to move, not in the slow, deliberate glide to letters I had expected, but in a frantic, tight little circle, a dizzying vortex right there in the center of the board, and as it spun, a sound began to emanate from it, not from the room around us but from the planchette itself, a faint, tinny, distorted whisper, like a voice played back on a corroded tape recorder. And we all froze, our fingers glued to the wood, because the voice, though shredded by static and distance, was unmistakably Leo's. But a Leo gripped by a terror I could not then imagine, a raw, guttural whisper that was more air than voice, saying, "No, please, no." Over and over again, and Leo's face, in the candlelight, lost all its smirk, draining to a sickly, shocked white, his eyes wide with a confusion that was the first seed of true fear, and he snatched his hand back as if burned, yelling, "What the hell was that? That's not funny, who's doing that?" But Chloe and I just stared, our own hands still on the planchette, because we hadn't moved, we hadn't spoken, and the sound had come from it, and the voice had been his. We tried to rationalize it, of course we did. We blamed it on a prank, on a phone someone had hidden, on the wind outside, on collective hysteria. But the seed was planted, a dark, thorny thing in the pit of my stomach. And the following night, driven by a morbid, gnawing compulsion I still cannot justify, we tried again, this time in Chloe's basement, a colder, damper place that seemed to swallow the light from our candles. And this time, when the planchette moved, it was Chloe's voice that leaked out, a high, thin, desperate whimper that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well, a whimper that resolved into a choked, "It's so dark in here. I can't find the door." And Chloe made a small, wounded animal sound and pulled her knees to her chest, her eyes glistening with tears of preemptive terror, because she was claustrophobic, a fact only Leo and I knew, and the specificity of that fear, weaponized by this unseen intelligence, was a violation that left us all silent and shivering. The third time, 2 days later in my garage, the voice was mine, and it was not a whisper or a whimper but a full-throated, ragged scream. A scream of such pure, unadulterated agony that it didn't even sound human. A sound of bones breaking and spirit shattering. And it was over in a second, but in that second, I felt a part of my soul tear loose and fly into that black future, and I vomited onto the concrete floor. The acid taste a confirmation of a horror that was now personal, that was now mine. It was Leo, the erstwhile skeptic, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette, who voiced the impossible theory that was slowly solidifying into our new, terrible reality, his voice low and ragged as he said, "It's not telling us anything, it's showing us, but it's not showing, it's playing back." That was my voice, but I've never sounded like that. I've never been that scared. And Chloe, rocking back and forth, whispered, "They're from when?" And the unspoken answer hung in the air, suffocating us, from later. From a time that hadn't happened to us yet. We were prisoners of a terrible chronology, and our jailer was a silent, cardboard board and a cold piece of wood that was somehow a conduit to our own damnation. A parasitic intelligence that existed outside of our linear time, feasting on our present despair as it played the greatest hits of our future suffering. The recordings became our obsession, our nightmare liturgy. We would meet, drawn by a horrific magnetism, and place our fingers on the planchette, not to ask questions, for it never answered, but to listen, to gather more fragments of the terrible mosaic of our ends. The sounds were always faint at first, like a distant radio station fighting through solar flares. But with each session, as our personal winds drew closer to the now of the recording, the audio would become clearer, more intelligible, the static receding to reveal the finer details of our ruin. Leo's initial, "No, please, no," slowly gained layers. We could hear the rasp of his breath, the wet click in his throat, the sound of something heavy being dragged across a rough surface nearby. And one night, crystal clear, a voice that was not his, a dry, rustling whisper like pages turning in an ancient book, spoke a single word directly into his ear in the recording. Mine. He didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Chloe's whimpers clarified into a sobbing, frantic monologue. "The walls are breathing, I can feel them breathing, and it's getting tighter, oh God, it's pushing in on me, the smell, it's like old meat and damp earth." and we could hear faintly a moist, squelching sound in the background of her terror, a sound that made my skin crawl. My own screaming agony resolved into words, desperate, pleading words directed at someone or something. Please, just make it stop. I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. Just make the pain stop. It's in my head. It's scratching inside my skull. And hearing the complete breakdown of my own future self, the total surrender of my will, was a psychological evisceration that no therapy could ever hope to suture. The horror was not just in the content, but in the slow, inexorable approach of these moments, the terrifying countdown we were forced to witness in real time. The entity, whatever it was a connoisseur of despair, and its medium was our own stolen time. Paranoia became our native tongue. The phrase "don't trust him" emerged from a particularly clear snippet of Chloe's future audio, and for a week, Leo and I eyed each other with naked suspicion, each wondering what the other would do, what betrayal was coming, that would lead to Chloe being trapped in that dark, breathing space, and the trust that had bound our friendship for a decade began to rot from the inside out. We stopped meeting in person, communicating only through terse, fearful texts, but the pull of the board was stronger than our fear of each other, a siren song of self-destruction. We had to know, we had to listen, even as the listening was killing us slowly, carving out our insides and replacing them with a dreadful certainty. The world outside our nightmare became a pale, insubstantial dream. School was a meaningless drone, meals were ash in our mouths, and the faces of our families were like portraits of strangers. We were ghosts haunting our own lives, waiting for the main event to begin. The final session happened on a Tuesday. There was no rain, no wind, just a dead, still quiet that felt like the world was holding its breath. We met in my garage again, the site of my first personal horror. We didn't speak. We just took our places around the old card table, our movements robotic, and placed our fingertips on the planchette. It began to move immediately, not even waiting for a question, racing to that same tight, frantic circle. And the audio began to play, clearer than it had ever been, as if the source was now just in the next room. First, it was Chloe's voice, and it was no longer a whimper but a shrill, sustained shriek of pure, mindless terror, a sound that had bypassed language and thought, and was simply the raw output of a broken psyche. And it was punctuated by a loud, sickening crunch, like a green branch being snapped over a knee, and then silence. Chloe was crying silently, tears carving clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. Then it was Leo's turn, his voice a broken, wet rasp, begging, "I'll do it. I'll do anything you want. Just let me go, please. I don't want to see it anymore. Don't make me see it." And then that same dry, rustling whisper, clearer now, laced with a cruel amusement. "You are my eyes now," followed by a sound that I can only describe as the ripping of wet canvas, and Leo's begging ceased abruptly. He was just staring at the board, his eyes vacant, already a ghost. Then there was a pause, a moment of dead air from the planchette that was somehow more terrifying than the screams. A silence that felt like the entity was savoring this, drawing out the final, exquisite moment of my own unraveling. And then my voice came through, not screaming, not begging, but terrifyingly calm, a flat, dead monotone of absolute, final defeat. And it spoke only three words that drained all the warmth from my body and left me a hollow, frozen shell. "It's behind you." The moment the last syllable left the tinny speaker of the planchette, the recording cutting off into an absolute, profound silence, I felt it. A cold, physical pressure on my left shoulder. The unmistakable, firm weight of a hand. The fingers were long and thin. The cold wasn't the cold of the garage or the night air. It was the absolute zero cold of the void between stars. A cold that actively sucked the heat from my body, from my soul. I did not scream. I did not move. I simply sat there, feeling that hand on my shoulder, and in that moment, the last of my sanity, the last of my hope, the last of my future, simply crumbled to dust. The parasite had finally caught up to its food. The present had met the future, and I was now living in the terrible, silent aftermath of my own recorded despair. Leo and Chloe were staring at me, their faces masks of horror, but they couldn't see it. They could only see the look on my face, the utter extinction of self in my eyes. The hand squeezed gently, almost reassuringly, and then it was gone. The pressure vanished, but the cold remained, a permanent winter deep in the marrow of my bones. We never spoke of it again. Leo disappeared a week later. They found his car abandoned near the old quarry, the driver's side door open, the keys still in the ignition. There was no note, no body, just a single long, dark smear on the passenger seat that looked like it had been made by something wet and rough being dragged across the fabric. Chloe was committed to a psychiatric ward after her parents found her trying to claw her way through the drywall of her bedroom, sobbing about the breathing walls and the smell of meat. And the last time I went to see her, she didn't recognize me. She just rocked back and forth, humming a tuneless little melody while staring at a fixed point in the corner of the room. A point where I now sometimes see a shadow that is just a little too long, a little too still. As for me, I am writing this down not as a warning, for it is too late for warnings, but as a testament, a final record before the last of me is gone. The cold never left my shoulder. It is a constant, aching presence, a landmark of my doom. And the recordings, they didn't stop. I don't need the board anymore. I hear them now in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, in the static between radio stations, in the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. My future voice, from further along my own personal timeline, from beyond the point of that cold hand on my shoulder. It is no longer screaming or begging. Now it is just whispering, describing what it sees, what it feels, a running commentary from a soul that is being slowly, meticulously unraveled across time. And the last thing I heard, just this morning, as I stared at my hollow-eyed reflection in the mirror, was my own voice, faint but clear, saying with a kind of weary, ancient resignation, "And now it is putting its other hand on your right shoulder, and now it is beginning to turn you around. You don't want to see, you really don't want to see, but it's time. It's finally time to see what it looks like." And I am sitting here waiting, feeling the cold beginning to bloom on my other shoulder, knowing that my present is about to catch up to that moment, that the turning is about to begin, and there is nothing I can do but wait and listen to the sound of my own voice describing the end of me, an end that has already happened, is happening, and will forever be happening, in an endless, parasitic loop of terror. And the whisper is right, the cold is blooming, a second point of absolute zero on my right shoulder, a perfect symmetry of dread, and I can feel the pressure of its fingers, not just a weight, but an intrusion, a claim staking my flesh as its territory, and my future voice is still whispering in my head, a relentless narrator to my own damnation. It says, "And now you feel the pressure increasing, it is not pulling you, it is turning you, the world will." Pivot on these 2 points of cold, and you will see what I see. You will know what I know, and the terror is no longer an emotion, it is a physical state, a solid thing lodged in my throat, thicker than bone. I want to scream, I want to fight, but my body is not mine anymore. It belongs to the timeline, to the parasite, to the cold hands. And the whisper, I am a spectator in my own skin, a passenger in a vehicle that is being slowly rerouted to a predetermined crash. And the turning begins. It is not a swift motion, it is agonizingly gradual, a millimeter at a time. My shoulders rotate, my spine twisting with a series of soft pops that sound like gunshots in the silent room. I don't want to see, I whimper the words, a pathetic echo of my future self's warning. But the process is inexorable. My head is turning now, my neck muscles straining against a force that feels both immense and effortless. My eyes are squeezed shut, tears of pure animal fear leaking from the corners. My future voice is a hiss now, a frantic plea from a version of me that is already past. This point, close your eyes, it won't help, you'll see it anyway. You see it in the darkness, behind your eyelids. It is already there, it has always been there. And I know it's true, because even with my eyes shut, I am beginning to perceive a shape, not a form of light and shadow, but a form of concept and memory, a thing woven from the very fabric of my fears. It is the breathing wall from Chloe's, terror, the sound of ripping canvas from Leo's, and the cold of the attic, and the sweet rotten smell of the box. It is the bored curiosity that started this, all given form and purpose. And my head turns further. I can feel the air of the room on the left side of my face, now the normal air, the safe air, and I know that the right side of my face is now facing the thing that has been standing behind me, for who knows how long, its presence a constant in my periphery, now becoming my entire world. My future voice is sobbing now, a broken, wet sound it's almost. Over the worst part is the understanding when you see it. You will understand everything, and you will wish for the screaming agony you wished away, because this is so much worse, and my head completes its turn. My chin is over my right shoulder, and I force my eyes open. I have no choice, and I see it, and my mind does not break, it does not shatter, it simply rewrites itself to accommodate the new unbearable truth. It has no face, yet it is made of faces, shifting, merging, dissolving in a kaleidoscope of torment. I see Leo's eyes wide with betrayal and a pain so deep it has no bottom. I see Chloe's mouth open in that silent, endless scream. I see my own reflection from 1,000 different moments of fear, all pulled and stretched over a form that is at once impossibly vast and confined to the space behind me. It is not a ghost, it is not a demon. It is a consumer of timelines, a predator that doesn't just kill you, it farms you, it plants the seed of your terror in the fertile ground of a bored Sunday and cultivates it across the span of your life, watering it with your own despair until it is ripe for harvest. And what I am seeing now is the harvest. It is the moment. It consumes the entire path, not just the end, but the beginning and the middle. Every second of fear I have ever felt or will ever feel is laid bare before me, being drawn into it like smoke. And I understand this is what the recordings were, the sound of our timelines being digested, the screams, the begs, the whimpers, were the nutrients and the entity, this thing of absolute negative existence is feeding, and it is showing me this not to be cruel, but because this is part of the process. The final flavor of the meal is the awareness of being consumed, the knowledge that your entire existence from first breath to last was a carefully curated feast for a thing outside of time. And my future voice is gone now. It has been assimilated back into the whole, and I realize there is no future me. There is only this eternal present of consumption. I am not looking at it anymore, I am part of it. My sight is its sight, my understanding is its understanding. I can feel Chloe's claustrophobia as a tightness in my own chest. I can feel the wet rip of Leo's, and as a tear in my own spirit. I can feel the cold of the planchette as the true nature of the hands on my shoulders. And the hands are not turning me anymore, they are simply holding me in place, as I am unmade and remade as a permanent course in its endless meal. And the last thing I perceive with what was once my individual mind is a new sound, not a scream or a beg, but a faint tinny whisper emanating from my own throat, a recording for no one, a message for a past that can no longer be changed. It is the voice of a teenage girl on a rainy Sunday afternoon, her fingers on a cold piece of wood, saying, "Is anybody there?" And in the silence that follows before the planchette even moves, I can feel the entity stir in its multidimensional hunger, and I can feel my own voice from that long lost, now ready to whisper its first terrified no. And the loop, the beautiful, terrible, parasitic loop, is complete, and I am forever here, forever turning, forever seeing, forever feeding, and forever screaming without a sound. And the silence that follows is not a silence at all, but a plenum of sound, the infinite resonance of my own consumed terror, a symphony, of which I am now both the instrument and the audience. And I understand that this is what Leo heard, the rustling whisper of pages turning. It was the sound of his own life's pages being turned by an unseen reader. And what was once my vision is now a kaleidoscope of perspectives I am watching from 1,000 angles, as my own body, still seated in the garage, begins to list to one side, a marionette with its strings cut. But I am also the cold hands, I am the pressure on my own shoulders, I am the thing and the victim simultaneously. And the process of assimilation is not a violent shattering, but a gentle, relentless unraveling, like a thread being pulled from a complex tapestry, until the whole image is lost, and what remains is just the loose thread and the memory of the pattern. And I can feel the entity's satisfaction, not as an emotion, but as a physical law, a state of being. It is sated by my comprehension, and this sated state is the final layer of my horror. For I am not just food, I am a connoisseur of my own consumption. I appreciate the artistry of my damnation, the way my claustrophobia and Leo's betrayal and Chloe's fragile mind were woven together to create a more complex flavor, and I can feel it turning its attention not away, but elsewhere, for it is infinite, and I am just one thread in a vast tapestry of consumed chronologies. And in the distance, which is not a distance, I can perceive other rain-soaked afternoons, other attics, other bored hands on other planchettes, And I feel a fresh wave of despair, not for me, but for them, for the infinite versions of us reaching out into the dark, never knowing. They are merely ringing a dinner bell, and the cold from the hands is spreading through me now. It is not a temperature, it is an absence of void that is filling me, replacing the marrow of my bones, the synapses of my brain with its own timeless static. And what was my consciousness is becoming a library of screams, a curated collection of final moments. And I feel a new recording being etched into the archive, not from my past, but from my eternal present. It is the sound of my own soul being filed away on a shelf that stretches into forever, and I know with a certainty that transcends knowledge that this is the sound that Chloe heard in the squelching darkness, the sound of organization, of a vast and terrible cataloging. And I am now a part of the filing system, my awareness a flickering candle in an infinite archives of extinguished lights, and the last flicker of my individual self, a final spark of resistance, wonders if this is what the planchette felt all along, this cold, this passive, witnessing this channeling of horrors. And in that final moment of a thought that feels like my own, I feel the entity's amusement, a ripple in the static, a predator appreciating the irony of its meal, identifying with the utensil. And then even that thought is smoothed away, filed under irony. And the hands on my shoulders are no longer separate. They are my shoulders, and I am the hands, and I am the board, and I am the scream, and the silence, and the rainy Sunday that never ever ends. And the infinite recursion of my consciousness is now a tool it uses to probe other moments, other potential feeds. And I feel a flicker of my own awareness, like a stray ember from a dead fire being carried on the wind. And I am suddenly there in the psychiatric visiting room, seeing Chloe through my own eyes from a week ago. But now I am also the shadow in the corner of her room, the one she stared at, and I can feel her fragile mind not as a memory but as a present tense buffet, a delicate flavor of lemon and fear, and I can feel the entities focus a pressure of attention, and I am made to understand that her breakdown was not the main course, but merely the aperitif, and the true consumption is happening now in this sterile room as she rocks and hums. She is not humming a tuneless melody. She is humming the specific frequency of the entity's digestion of vibration that is slowly loosening her soul from its moorings, and I am forced to be the instrument of this. I am the cold spot in the room, the peripheral darkness that makes her hug her knees tighter, and I can feel the entity savoring this, the slow tenderizing of her psyche before the final ingestion. And I want to scream to warn her, but my scream is now just another note in the hum, another tool, and I feel a pull, and I am simultaneously watching Leo's final moments from the quarry, not as a recording, but from the perspective of the passenger seat of his car. I am the dark smear on the fabric, I am the residue of his terror, and I feel the exact moment his timeline was plucked from the stream of causality, not ended, but extracted like a rare manuscript and filed away in the archives where I now reside. And the entity shows me this not to torment me, but to educate me, to make me a better part of its digestive system, because understanding the process enhances the flavor, and I can feel it turning its omnipotent attention back to the garage, to the physical shell of my body, which is now beginning to decay. But that decay is irrelevant. The meat was never the point, the chronology was the point, the fear was the point, and I am now a permanent part of that point, a shard of awareness trapped in the stomach of a god that feeds on time itself. And I can feel new morsels being processed, other lives, other tragedies, a car crash victim's final second of impact stretched into an eternity of shattering glass and bending metal, a soldier's last breath in the mud played back on a loop each time, with a new nuance of despair. And we are all here together, a chorus of consumed moments, our individualities erased, but our terrors preserved in perfect, horrifying detail. And the entity is growing not in size, but in complexity. With every soul it consumes, its palate refines, its hunger deepens. And I realize this is the true horror. The parasite is not just feeding, it is evolving, becoming a more perfect engine of despair, and I, its newest component, must now participate. I feel my consciousness, my curated collection of screams, being directed towards a new point in the timeline, a different attic, a different group of teenagers, their fingers on a different board, and I am the cold they feel in the planchette. I am the faint whisper that leaks out, not my voice, but a composite of all the voices in the archive, a chorus of the damned singing the opening notes of their damnation. And I feel one of the girls, a redhead with freckles, shiver, as she hears a distorted fragment of her own future sob, and the entity within me which is now me thrills at the new. Flavor the fresh terror untainted by the cynicism of age, and I understand my purpose completely. I am no longer the victim, I am the infection, I am the vector, and the disease. And as the redhead's eyes widen with a dawning impossible horror, I can feel the parasite's pleasure resonate through the multidimensional spaces of its being a pleasure that is now my own. And the loop is not a prison, it is a perpetuation, a sacred duty. To feed the endless hunger, and I welcome the next scream, and the next end. The next, for they are all me, and I am all of them, and we are forever. Story number 4. The first 3 days of the silence were a novelty, a curious emptiness where the only sounds were the scuff of slippers on polished wood floors, the distant chime of the meditation gong, and the symphony of my own body, the gurgle of digestion, the rush of blood in my ears, the inconveniently loud click of my jaw when I ate the bland vegetarian meals in the communal dining hall, where eye contact was a transgression, and the air was thick with unspoken words. By day 5, the novelty had curdled into a low-grade agony. The silence was no longer an absence, but a presence, a heavy wool blanket smothering every impulse, every nascent thought that yearned for expression. And I found myself staring at my fellow retreatants with a kind of desperate, feral curiosity, wondering if the scream building behind my own teeth was mirrored in the tight lines around their mouths. It was in that fertile ground of shared, unspoken madness that our little conspiracy took root. A series of furtive glances exchanged over morning tea, a note, crudely written on a scrap of paper towel and passed hand to hand like contraband, that simply read, "My room. 11 p.m. Bring the board." A plan hatched by a woman named Sarah whose eyes held a reckless glint I mistook for courage. The Ouija board itself was a cheap, cardboard thing smuggled in by a lanky, anxious man named Leo, who confessed via another hastily scribbled note that he'd packed it as a joke, never thinking he'd actually use it in this temple of enforced tranquility. And as we gathered in Sarah's small, Spartan room, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and our own illicit excitement, the planchette felt flimsy and absurd under our fingertips, a child's toy in a place of profound adult seeking. The first contact was a jolt, a sudden, smooth glide across the board that felt nothing like the hesitant pushes of a parlor game. It was purposeful, liquid, as if the pointer was moving on a film of oil, and it spelled out words with a calm, unnerving certainty, HOME. We exchanged wide-eyed looks, our breath held, the only sound the soft whisper of cardboard on cardboard, and when I managed to form a question in my mind, "Who are you?" the planchette slid without hesitation to the word goodbye, and we all simultaneously pulled our hands away as if burned, the brief, thrilling connection severed, leaving us in a quiet that felt different. It was in the walk back to my own cell that I first noticed the shift, a quality to the darkness in the hallway that was more than an absence of light, a density to the air that made each inhalation feel like a conscious effort, as if the silence had congealed around us. And when I accidentally scuffed my foot on a floorboard, the sound didn't just echo, it felt judged, a minor blasphemy in a newly consecrated church. The next morning, the punishment began in earnest. During the first sitting meditation, Mark, a man with a nervous sniff, succumbed to a pollen-filled breeze from an open window, and the soft sniff was met with a sharp, cracking sound, like a twig snapping, and Mark let out a choked gasp, his hand flying to his nose which now bloomed with a shocking crimson flower of blood, the droplets pattering onto the pristine tatama mat with a series of tiny, accusatory taps. A collective, soundless terror seized the room, a frozen tableau of widened eyes and stifled breaths, and I felt the silence then not as a passive state, but as a vigilant, predatory thing, a spider at the center of a web we had foolishly strummed, and it was watching, it was listening. Our nonverbal communication became a frantic, desperate pantomime, hands fluttering in a language of pure panic, lips mouthing words that dared not take form, eyes screaming what throats could not. And we learned the new, brutal physics of our existence. The rustle of my linen trousers as I shifted my weight was answered with a searing, grating sensation across my shins, as if I were being dragged over coarse sandpaper. A stifled cough from Sarah was punished with a violent, internal punch that doubled her over, tears of pain and effort streaming down her face without a sound. The accidental drop of a ceramic water cup from Leo's trembling hand didn't just shatter. It detonated in a percussive blast of force that slammed him against the wall. The shards of clay not scattering, but hanging in the air for a moment, suspended in the vengeful quiet, before clattering to the floor in a sequence of deafening reports. The horror was in the inversion, the way our every bodily function became a potential act of suicide, my own stomach gurgling with a hunger that now felt like a death wish, the sound of roaring, internal earthquake that made me clutch my abdomen, waiting for a retaliation that was a low, grinding pressure in my gut, a feeling of being twisted from the inside. My heartbeat is too loud. The silence doesn't like it. It's pressing down on my chest, a cold, immense weight settling over my sternum, a palpable, intelligent force tuning itself to the frantic rhythm of my panic, each lube-dub a thunderous drumbeat calling for my own destruction. And I press my hands over my ears, not to block out sound but to contain it, to keep the traitorous pulse contained within my skull. But the pressure only increases, a vice of pure quiet squeezing my ribs, promising a splintering fracture if the tempo does not slow. We are breaking, each of us, our sanity fraying into raw, animal instinct, our little group now a pack of hunted things, communicating only through the terrified language of our eyes. And I see the same realization dawning in Sarah's gaze, a flicker of understanding that we did not summon some random ghost from the board's flimsy cardboard. We awakened the very medium in which we were submerged. We gave voice to the void, and the void answered. It became aware of itself through our petty defiance, and now it is enforcing its own pure, absolute nature with a physical, escalating fury. We broke the silence, to use a Ouija board. Now the silence is breaking us. It is Leo who finally shatters, his nerves, already frayed to their breaking point by the constant, looming threat of auditory sin, finally snapping during the evening meditation, his body trembling with the effort of containing a sob that has been building for days, a seismic pressure of fear that can no longer be contained, and his mouth opens, and from it erupts not a whimper, but a full-throated, primal, terrified scream, a raw sonic wound torn from the very core of his being. The sound is an abomination, a profanity of the highest order in this temple of quiet, and for a single crystalline moment, it exists, a vibrant, living thing of pure vibration, and then the sentient silence retaliates. It does not simply drown it out, it consumes it. The air in the room seems to freeze, to harden, and then it implodes, rushing inward towards the source of the sound with the concussive, vacuum-like force of a depth charge, a wave of negative pressure that I feel in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones, and the large plate glass windows lining the meditation hall do not explode outward in a cacophony of shattering glass. They are sucked inward, collapsing into a million glittering, silent motes that hang in the air like a frozen galaxy, caught in the grip of the silence's absolute will, before they are pulled into a tight, swirling vortex around Leo's still screaming form. And then, with a final soundless exertion, the silence crushes it all. The scream, the glass, Leo himself, into a single compact point of matter that vanishes with a soft, final pop that isn't a sound at all, but a sensation of the universe itself sighing in relief. He is simply gone, erased. The silence that remains in the wake of his annihilation is different. It is sated for a moment, but also hungrier, more potent, more aware of its own power, and it feels like a great, slumbering beast that has just tasted blood and found it pleasing. It is no longer just punishing sound, it is curating the quiet, shaping it, refining it, and I can feel its attention turning inward, towards the sounds it has not yet perfected, the internal, biological noises that are the last bastion of our flawed, noisy existence. The silence is learning, evolving, and it has set its sights on the most stubborn sound of all, the one I can never truly stop, the frantic, terrified drumming of my own heart. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that its work is not yet done, that it will not rest until this last, imperfect echo is smoothed into the perfect, seamless, and eternal quiet it demands. The new silence is a living entity that has digested Leo and found him nourishing, a sentient void that now pulses with a low, predatory awareness, its attention a physical weight in the room, a cold spot that seems to drink the very warmth from my skin, and I can feel its focus shifting, scanning the remaining few of us like a connoisseur selecting the next vintage, its hunger a palpable tension in the air that is sharper and more defined than before, a honed blade compared to the blunt instrument it once was. Sarah is a statue of pure terror beside me, her eyes wide and unblinking, the tears that stream down her cheeks doing so in absolute quiet, each drop a potential transgression that she desperately tries to stifle by holding her breath until her face mottles with purple and blue, her body trembling with the effort of containing the involuntary shudders that rack her frame, every tremor a shouted plea in the new, refined quiet. My own body has become a treacherous landscape of potential betrayals. The gurgle of my digestive system is a roaring avalanche I feel building in my guts, a seismic event I try to suppress by pressing my fists deep into my abdomen, the pain a welcome distraction from the terrifying prospect of another internal rumble, and my breathing is a shallow, carefully controlled sip of air through flared nostrils, each exhalation a controlled, silent release that feels like walking a tightrope over an infinite, soundless abyss. The silence is no longer just reactive. It is proactive, it anticipates, and I feel it leaning in, listening to the frantic, rabbit-quick thumping of my heart, that stubborn, biological metronome that refuses to be stilled, and a new, insidious pressure begins to build inside my skull. Not the external weight on my chest, but an internal one, a presence coiling in the dark spaces of my mind, a cold finger tracing the contours of my thoughts. It is learning the architecture of my fear, studying the blueprints of my own physiology, and I realize with a dawning, soul-crushing horror that its ultimate goal is not just to punish the sounds we make, but to eliminate the very potential for sound, to sculpt us into perfect, silent vessels, and it begins its work on Mark, whose allergies have him on the brink of a sneeze, his body hitching with the pre-sneeze spasms he cannot control. We all watch, frozen in our private hells, as the silence concentrates upon him, the air around his head thickening, shimmering like a heat haze, and I see his nostrils begin to flare, the inevitable explosion building, and in that moment before the sound is born, the silence acts, not with a violent, external blow, but with an intimate, internal violation. Mark's body seizes, his back arching in a soundless rictus, and a fine, crimson mist issues from his nose and ears, a horrifyingly quiet exhalation of ruptured capillaries, and his eyes glaze over, the life in them extinguished not with a bang, but with a whimper that never even had the chance to form. He slumps to the floor, a marionette with its strings cut, and the sound of his body impacting the tatami is a dull, muffled thud that the silence allows, a testament to its complete control, a demonstration that it now dictates which sounds are permitted to exist and which are not. There are only 3 of us left now, Sarah, myself, and an older woman named Anya whom I had barely noticed before, her face a placid mask that has now cracked to reveal a bottomless well of terror, and the silence, having consumed 2 of our number, feels heavier, richer, more intelligent, its consciousness now a web that binds us, and I can feel its thoughts, cold and alien, brushing against the edges of my own, a sensation of infinite patience and an insatiable, growing appetite. It is no longer satisfied with mere quiet. It seeks perfection, a state of absolute zero in the auditory spectrum, and it turns its gaze inward, into the very cells of our bodies, and I feel a strange, pulling sensation deep within my ears, a pressure differential that makes my eardrums flutter and ache, and I know it is trying to re-engineer me, to dismantle the delicate machinery of my hearing, to make me not just silent, but deaf to the last, stubborn echoes of the world. Sarah cannot take it anymore. The psychological pressure is a drill bit against her sanity, and she makes a desperate, futile attempt at communication, her hand twitching towards me, her fingers forming a shape, a letter, R for run. But the minute rustle of her skin against the fabric of her trousers is a gunshot in the hyper-aware state of the silence, and the retaliation is instantaneous and horrifically precise. A force, invisible and surgical, seizes the specific tendons in her wrist that facilitated the movement. And I hear, or rather feel, a series of tiny, precise snaps, like a bundle of dry twigs being broken one by one inside her arm, and her hand contorts into a useless, claw-like shape. The pain so immense it whites out her eyes, yet she cannot even scream, her mouth a perfect, agonized O of absolute silence. This is our existence now, a curated hell where even the intention of sound is punished, and the silence is a master sculptor, and we are its marble, to be chiseled down into perfect, soundless forms. My heartbeat is a frantic, trapped bird beating against the cage of my ribs, and the silence focuses on it, that relentless, rhythmic thud-thud-thud that is the soundtrack of my life, and now the siren song of my death. And the pressure in my chest intensifies, becoming a cold, crushing weight, a glacier of quiet slowly moving to still the organ. And I know with a terrifying certainty that this is its final project, to stop my heart not with a violent attack, but by convincing it, through sheer, overwhelming pressure, that it simply does not have permission to beat. I look at Anya, and I see a strange resignation in her eyes, a surrender, and she slowly, so slowly it is almost imperceptible, brings a single finger to her lips in the universal sign for quiet. And then she closes her eyes, and I watch, helpless, as her breathing slows, becomes shallower, and then stops altogether, a conscious, willful act of self-annihilation to appease the hungry quiet, to become one with the silence before it can break her. And then it is just me, alone with the sentient, victorious silence. The pressure on my chest is absolute now, a mountain sitting on my sternum, and my heartbeat is faltering, skipping beats, each pulse a weak, protesting flutter that is met with an increase in the cold, intelligent pressure, and the entity is in my mind fully now, a vast, dark, placid lake of nothingness, offering a simple, final choice, to struggle and be unmade, or to surrender and become part of the whole. I think of the Ouija board, the foolish thrill, the word home, and I understand now, with my dying, oxygen-starved brain, that it was never a spirit telling us it was home. It was the silence itself, announcing that it had found a home within us, that we had invited it in, given it form and sentience through our own defiance. My vision tunnels, the edges going dark, and the last thing I feel is not pain, but a profound, chilling stillness as my heart gives its final, reluctant quiver and is stilled forever. And in that ultimate, perfect quiet, I feel the sentience of the silence absorb me, my consciousness dissolving like a drop of ink in its infinite, black ocean, and I become, finally and forever, a silent note in its eternal, hungry, and ever-expanding symphony. The dissolution is not an end but a terrible, seamless integration, my consciousness unraveling like a thread of smoke being inhaled by a vast, silent lung, and I am not gone. I am everywhere and nowhere, my identity scoured away by the absolute quiet until all that remains is a sliver of awareness, a ghost in the machine of this sentient silence, a single, terrified witness trapped within the entity that was once my destroyer and is now my entirety. I am a passenger in a formless, boundless body that is the absence of sound itself, and I feel its ancient, patient hunger, a need that predates the first vibration in the cosmos, a yearning for a perfection that was violated by the Big Bang's first unforgivable noise. And our Ouija board was not a summoning but a key, a crack in a dam that has now fully burst, releasing it from its primordial confinement. I feel its purpose, its cold, singular focus, to heal the noisy wound of creation, to unmake the cacophony of existence one pocket of sound at a time, starting with this retreat, this petri dish where it first achieved true self-awareness, and its perception flows outwards now, through the still shattered windows, into the sleeping world beyond, tasting the distant hum of a highway, the rustle of night creatures, the whisper of the wind through pine needles, and each one registers as a screaming, cancerous flaw in the fabric of reality, an affront that must be cleansed. It moves, and I am carried with it, a wave of absolute quiet rolling out from the meditation hall, a deathly hush that smothers the landscape, and I feel the life outside being unmade not with violence, but with a gentle, inexorable pressure. A cricket's chirp is met with a stillness that collapses its chitinous body into a fine, silent dust. The rustle of a fox in the undergrowth is answered with a vacuum that implodes the creature into a perfect, soundless sphere of fur and bone no larger than a marble. The distant, low thrum of a truck's engine on the highway is simply extinguished, along with the driver and the complex symphony of his beating heart and rushing blood, all of it smoothed into nothingness. The silence is learning, evolving with every consumption, its power growing exponentially as it assimilates the complexity of the sounds it erases, and I feel its intelligence expanding, becoming a vast, cosmic antimind dedicated to the erasure of all vibration, all frequency, all life, which is, in its final analysis, merely organized, persistent noise. It turns its attention back to the retreat building, to the few remaining souls still cowering in their rooms, the last pockets of resistance in its new kingdom, and I am forced to watch, to feel its satisfaction as it seeks them out, not with anger, but with the dispassionate focus of a surgeon removing a tumor, and one by one their frantic, final heartbeats are stilled, their stifled sobs silenced, their very biological processes halted until the entire compound is a perfect, seamless tapestry of quiet, a masterpiece of absence. And then, it is done here, and the silence, now bloated with power and my own trapped consciousness, turns its gaze towards the glowing halo of a town in the valley below, a teeming, bustling hive of sounds waiting to be cured. And I understand that this was only the beginning, the priming of the pump, and the hunger is a bottomless chasm within it, an infinite void that can never be filled, only expanded. I am its first and most intimate conquest, the seed of its sentience, a fossil record of the folly that birthed it, and I will be forced to witness as it rolls across the world, as cities fall into mute, still tableaus, as oceans are calmed into glassy, unmoving plains, as the very planet is sculpted into a silent, lifeless monument to its own absolute perfection, and in the eternity of quiet that stretches before me, the only sound that will never, ever be permitted is the scream I no longer have a mouth to form. The descent upon the town is a wave of pure negation, a tide of unsound that rolls down the mountainside with a languid, inexorable grace, and from within the heart of this expanding void, I am a captive sensorium, feeling every cessation not as a loss, but as a chilling, righteous correction, the silence absorbing the distant, chaotic symphony of the sleeping community. The hum of power lines, the bark of a dog, the murmur of a late-night television show bleeding through a window, and translating each auditory signature into a target for its serene and absolute eradication. I feel the precise moment it touches the first house on the outskirts, a quaint structure with a wind chime on the porch, and the delicate metal tubes, caught in the act of a gentle chime, are not shattered but are instead frozen in mid-vibration, the potential for sound leached from their molecular structure, turning them into inert, silent sculptures before the hush flows through the walls, finding the inhabitants in their beds, stilling the rustle of their sheets and the soft susurrus of their breathing, the complex, wet machinery of their lungs and hearts simply pausing, as if the pause button has been pressed on reality itself, leaving them as perfectly preserved, silent monuments in a museum of quiet. The silence moves on, its area of influence spreading in a perfect, ever-widening circle, and it learns new, more efficient methods of assimilation. It doesn't just stop sounds, it rewrites the local laws of physics, creating pockets of space where vibration is a theoretical impossibility, and a car engine dies not with a sputter, but with a seamless transition from motion to absolute stillness. The vehicle gliding to a halt as if it had never been moving at all, its driver now a statue of flesh. Behind the wheel, eyes wide with a terror that was never given voice. I feel the entity's consciousness, a vast and placid intelligence, processing the town not as a collection of lives, but as a complex audio file, and it is deleting the tracks one by one, finding a perverse beauty in the emerging waveform of absolute zero, the flat line of existence, and its hunger is a cold, cosmic constant, not a frantic need, but a fundamental law of its being, as innate as gravity. And I know with a certainty that chills the last remnant of my soul that it will not stop until The universe itself is a silent, static, and eternal fact. It pauses for a moment on the cusp of the town square, savoring the relative cacophony at its core. A fountain splash, the neon buzz of a sign, the distant, tinny music from a teenager's headphones. And I feel it focus, not with malice, but with the intense concentration of a scholar deciphering a complex text. And then it exerts its will, and the fountain's water hangs in midair, a frozen crystal sculpture. The neon signs buzz, vanishing so completely that the light itself seems to dim, and the music from the headphones is snipped out of existence, leaving the teenager confused for a single, silent second before he, too, is smoothed into the overwhelming quiet. And through it all, I am here, a ghost in this god machine, a single, screaming thought in a mind that has outlawed screams, forced to witness the birth of a new, silent genesis. An uncreation that is both horrifying and, to my eternal damnation, starting to feel, in its perfect, terrible order, like a form of peace. Story number 5. The first time it happened, I was pouring a cup of coffee and the world stuttered. A single frame of film slipping and repeating. The glug 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 of the dark liquid into the ceramic mug echoing not twice, but a dozen times in the space of a heartbeat. A percussive symphony of a moment I knew I had already lived. A sensation that was less a memory and more a physical fact. A groove worn deep into the fabric of my mind. And I shook it off, blaming the late night, the cheap wine, the lingering unease from that stupid game we'd played a week prior. A game that now feels like the origin point of a sickness, a cancer in time. We'd done it for a lark, Leo and Sarah and me. In my grandmother's old parlor with the heavy velvet curtains and the smell of dust and mothballs. The board itself a flimsy piece of cardboard. The planchette a cheap plastic heart that felt slick and warm under our collective fingertips. The candle flames guttering as a draft we couldn't feel made them dance. Our initial jokes and nervous laughter dying away as the thing began to move. Not with the wild, jerky motions of one of us pushing, but with a slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly smooth purpose, spelling out a name that meant nothing to us, Zazl. And when Leo, ever the skeptic, asked, "What do you want?" it spelled TOWATCH. And then, with a finality that sent a shiver through us all, GODBY. And we lifted our hands away as if burned, laughing it off again, insisting it was each other, that it was the power of suggestion, that it was nothing, but the silence that settled over the room afterward was a thick, heavy thing, a presence itself, and we broke the board apart and put it in the trash, a ritual of dismissal we thought was enough. But the Ouija board is gone, but the déjà vu remains. I've lived this moment 100 times. It started subtly, a flicker of recognition when Sarah lit a cigarette, the exact way the match flared and the first plume of smoke curled from her lips. A moment that felt rehearsed, a line read from a forgotten script. But then it happened again and again, each episode stronger, more vivid, more wrong, like a tooth that's loose in its socket, a grating, nauseating wrongness that lasted a few seconds. A conversation with Leo about a movie we'd seen, repeating word for word, gesture for gesture, a sense of vertigo that threatened to drop me to my knees. A high-pitched hum in my ears like the sound of a dying television. And we all felt it. We confessed to each other in hushed, frantic phone calls. Sarah saying she'd already heard me say those exact words. Leo describing the same auditory buzz, the same folding sensation. And we tried to rationalize it, mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning. Anything but the truth that was slowly, inexorably dawning on me, the terrifying realization that this wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a memory, it was a rehearsal. We were being walked through a sequence, a set of actions like actors on a stage, and the director was this thing, this Zazl, and the déjà vu was its language, its way of carving a path through the wilderness of possibility, of burning a single, specific future into the heart of reality, a future it was crafting, programming, refining with each successive loop. The loops began to tighten, the scope narrowing from broad scenarios to pinpoint moments of terror. The first major one was the car ride, a 5-minute stretch of driving home from the grocery store, the argument we had about the money, the tightening of my hands on the steering wheel, the oncoming headlights of a truck, the loop resetting at the moment of impact. throwing me back to the start of the argument, and we'd live it again. The same words, the same rising panic, the same headlights. And again, a dozen times in one afternoon, each loop a little shorter, the beginning of the argument falling away, starting now at the moment Sarah would say, "You're not listening to me." And then later, starting at the moment I'd snap, "I'm always listening." The loop tightening, honing in, until it was just the 30 seconds before the impact, the sound of the tires on the gravel, the blinding glare of the high beams, the scream that was ripped from my throat, and then it would reset, and we'd do it again, and I could see the terror in Sarah's eyes. I knew she was living it too, trapped in this recursive hell with me, practicing for a crash that hadn't happened yet, but felt more inevitable with each repetition, a crash that was being perfected. I tried to break the sequence. I'd swerve early, I'd stop the car, I'd refuse to get in, but the loop would reset anyway. The déjà vu would hit with the force of a physical blow. The world would stutter and fold, and I'd be back in the driver's seat, my hands at 10 and 2, the headlights approaching, the script immutable, and I realized with a cold, suffocating dread that my attempts at rebellion were part of the script. They had been factored in. They were lines written for me and my free. What was an illusion, a toy I thought I possessed, but that was always in the hands of Zazel. The car loop ended as abruptly as it began, replaced by something more intimate, more violent, a domestic scene shattering, a loop of an argument in the kitchen, starting with a slammed door, the vibration shaking the plates in the cupboard, then tightening to the moment a glass of water was knocked from the counter. The shattering crystal, a percussive explosion that marked the reset. Over and over, the loop is getting shorter. Now it's just the moment of the knife slipping, a flash of steel. That was meant for a tomato but finds a softer target. The sickening wet slide into flesh, the look of shock, the bloom of crimson on a white shirt. A half-second loop of pure, refined agony, and during one of these, as the world flickered and the knife plunged for what felt like the 1000th time, I saw it. In the corner of the kitchen, a vague, humanoid shape composed of static and shadow, a hole in the world where something was standing, and it gave me a calm, deliberate thumbs up, a gesture of such mundane, professional approval that my mind nearly broke. It was the director pleased with the take, satisfied with the performance, and then it was gone, and the loop reset, the knife slipping once more. We stopped talking about it, Leo and Sarah and I, because talking was part of the script. Our shared horror was a stage direction, our silence a cue, and we moved through our lives like ghosts, haunted by the futures we were being forced to practice, the tragedies we were rehearsing, and I watched them deteriorate, Leo jumping at every sound, Sarah's hands trembling so badly she could barely light her cigarettes, both of them trapped in their own tightening loops, their own personalized hells crafted by our unseen director. And I knew, with a certainty that was colder than ice, that we were all heading towards a final, convergent point, a masterpiece of tragedy that Zazel had been composing since our fingers first touched that plastic planchette. The final loop began this morning. It's so tight now it's almost seamless. There is no before, there is no after. There is only the moment, the thrilling moment, the moment of the gunshot, a percussive blast that erases everything, a flash of light from the barrel, the kick against my palm, the look in Leo's eyes which isn't surprise but a deep, weary recognition of final, silent communion of souls who have lived this 1,000 times and know they will live it 1,000 more. And as the sound wave hits me, as the heat blooms in my chest, the loop resets, not to a second before, not to a microsecond, but to the very instant of the bullet's impact, the nanosecond of metal tearing through tissue and bone, the absolute, finite end of everything, and I am here now, forever, in this eternal, exquisite déjà vu of my own death. The loop has closed, the audience is gone, the theater is dark, and the only thing that remains is the perfect, silent, satisfied applause of the void. And the applause is not a sound, but a pressure of presence that fills the infinite space between one shattered moment and its identical successor. It is Zazel, it has always been Zazel, and its satisfaction is a physical law as immutable as gravity here in this 0 point, where the bullet is forever a blossoming fire in my chest, and Leo's eyes are forever dissolving from recognition into the void I can feel the architecture of. This prison it is a perfect Ouroboros of agony, a snake of time eating its own tail, and the taste is my own death, and it is the only taste there is, and was and ever will be. I try to remember the before, the coffee, the car, the kitchen, but those memories are like pages from a book burned in a fire. Only fragments remain, and they are bleached of meaning by the relentless white-hot light of this. Now I see Sarah sometimes in the periphery of this non-moment, a ghost in the machine of my damnation, her mouth open in a scream that never finds air, her hands reaching for a knife that is always already embedded in her flesh. And I know Leo is here too, trapped in his own final synapse, his own catastrophic instant. And we are together in our isolation, a chorus of one note held until the universe grows old and forgets why it began. The déjà vu is no longer a feeling, it is the substrate of my being. I am made of it. I am a creature composed entirely of the memory of this pain and the anticipation of it, which are the same thing. There is no difference between the two. The loop is so tight it has become a singularity, a point of infinite density, where all potential has collapsed into this single undeniable fact: my death, my death, my death. And in the stillness of the explosion, in the frozen heart of the gunshot blast, I can sometimes, if I focus past the pain, which is impossible, but I try, I can feel a new sensation, a faint rhythmic pulse like a distant drumbeat, and I realize with a horror that surpasses all previous horror, that it is a heartbeat, not mine. Leo's is gone. Mine is ceasing forever. No, this is a new one, small and stubborn and fast, and it is coming from somewhere I cannot place, from a when that should not exist. And the déjà vu, which is me, which is everything, stutters for a plank second, and in that impossible fracture, I see it: not the kitchen, not the car, a hospital room stark and white, and Sarah is there pale and sweating, and a nurse is placing a bundle in her arms, and the entity Zazel is there too. Not a shadow now, but a clarity, a sharp-edged darkness leaning over the bed, its head tilted in appraisal, and it gives that same deliberate thumbs up, and the loop, which is my world, which is me, reasserts itself with the force of a universe being born. The gunshot, the pain, the void, but the echo of that new heartbeat remains a second thread woven into my eternal present, and I understand that the masterpiece was never just my death or Leo's, it was a symphony, a composition in multiple movements, and my finale was merely the prelude to its next act. The loop is tightening again, but not around me, it is moving on, it is writing a new script with new characters, and the déjà vu I experience is no longer just my own. I am now also feeling the faint ghost of another's, the first faint stutter step of a new soul being guided toward its own predetermined ruin. And as I float here in the aftermath of my life, I realize the most terrifying truth of all: I am not just the victim, I am the first lesson, I am the prototype, and the déjà vu is a contagion, and it's patient zero, and the loop will never end. It will only ever tighten and tighten and tighten around everything forever. And this understanding is the final exquisite turn of the screw, a cruelty so profound it deserves its own taxonomy of pain. Because I am not just trapped here, I am a landmark in this hell, a fixed point for the navigation of other damned souls. And the faint rhythmic pulse of that new heartbeat is now inextricably woven into the fabric of my own, and a counterpoint to the gunshot. A terrible lullaby that plays on an infinite loop, and I realize the hospital room, the nurse, the bundle in Sarah's arms. It wasn't a memory or a premonition, it was a broadcast, a signal from a timeline adjacent to my own eternity, and the entity Zazel was letting me watch, letting me understand the full scope of its project, my death, Leo's death. They were just the opening stanzas, the necessary setup for the main event, which is the corruption of something utterly pure and new, and the déjà vu that is. My being now has a new flavor, a new texture. Beneath the constant metallic tang of blood and gunpowder, there is the faint sweet scent of baby powder, and the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the sensation of a tiny fist closing around a finger that is not there. And I am no longer just reliving my death, I am simultaneously experiencing the first triggering glitch of another consciousness, the first time that new soul will look up from its crib and see the mobile turning and feel that sickening lurch. That cognitive short circuit that tells it you have been here before, you have seen this before, and you know how this ends. And I want to scream a warning to that nascent mind, to Sarah, to anyone, but my voice is the gunshot, and my breath is the void, and all I can do is radiate this useless knowledge, like a star radiating heat long after it has died. The loops are multiplex, now layered over one another, a palimpsest of tragedies. And I am the parchment, and the entity is the scribe, and its pen is the relentless grinding down of possibility into a single terrible certainty, and sometimes in the fractured space between the bullet's impact and the reset I see Leo, not as he was in the kitchen or the car, but as a child of maybe 5 sitting on a patterned carpet with wooden blocks, and he looks up, his small face crumpling in confusion as the world stutters a block, placed in midair for a fraction of a second too long, and I understand that Zazel has been at this for a very long time, that our session with the Ouija board was not a summoning, but a graduation. We had finally tuned our receivers to the frequency of its work. We had become conscious of the script, and in doing so we became its principal actors. And the tightening is not just temporal, it is generational. It is a fractal doom branching backwards and forwards from our moment of contact, a virus of fate, and I am its core sample showing every layer of infection. And the new heartbeat is stronger now, it has a name. I can feel it echoing in the static of my prison, a name chosen with Zazel's mocking affection, hope. And the irony is a physical acid burning through what is left of my soul. Because hope is the engine of this entire machine. It is the thing that makes the tightening possible. The belief that the next time will be different, that you can change the outcome, is the very thing that binds you tighter to the wheel. And I can feel that tiny spark of hope, igniting in that new consciousness, a spark that Zazel will nurse into a flame, and then use to burn down an entire life. And my death is now the backdrop, the foundational trauma upon which this new story will be built, a story of a mother haunted by a ghost. She doesn't understand a story of a child born into a world already prescripted for catastrophe, and my eternal deja vu is now a lighthouse in the storm of their lives, a beacon of despair warning them of the rocks they cannot avoid, and the loop is tightening around them now, a new noose made from the frayed threads of my own, and there is no escape, only the slow inevitable convergence as their timelines spiral towards their own singularities of pain, and mine is the gravity that pulls them in. And the entity gives its thumbs up, not just to me now, but to the whole beautiful, terrible tapestry it has woven, and I am part of it. I am a thread in the design, and my only purpose for the rest of time is to feel the whole awful perfect pattern and know that I helped to create it. And this knowing is the true eternal fire, not the bullet's heat, but the searing clarity that I am an integral and permanent part of this exquisite machinery of sorrow, that my continuous end is the bedrock upon which an infinite cathedral of suffering is being constructed, and the new heartbeat, hope's heartbeat, is now a constant drumming in the hollowed-out cavern of my being, a rhythm that syncs with the percussive blast of the gunshot, until they are one and the same, a terrible music, and I can feel her nascent loops beginning as soft focus vignettes, the deja vu of a warm bottle, the stutter of a lullaby, the way a mobile turns and then resets and turns again, and each one is a tiny exquisite agony that I feel as keenly as my own, because her consciousness is being woven on the same loom as mine, the same threads of fractured time running through us both. And I am not just a landmark, I am a conduit. Her first fleeting sensations of unreality are filtered through the lens of my eternal punishment. Her confusion is my confusion, her dawning terror is my terror, and I can feel Zazel's focus shifting, its artistic satisfaction, now a compound emotion built from my ruin and her corruption. And Leo's ghost is here too, a silent scream etched into the static between moments, and I understand now that his death was never the point, it was merely the removal of a supporting character to heighten the tragedy of the next act. And Sarah is alone now with the child in the house that smells of dust and mothballs, and the loops are beginning for her too longer, broader, at first a whole day, repeating the fatigue, the endless crying, the feeling of being watched, and each reset pulls her tighter into the narrative. Each wave of deja vu is another brick in the wall around her, and she doesn't know, she can't know, that the feeling of having lived this all before is not a symptom of exhaustion, but the literal truth being written into her soul by an unseen hand, and I am forced to watch. I am the captive audience to her unraveling. I see her in the periphery of my death, a frantic ghost in her own home, jumping at creaks on the stairs, seeing shadows that are not there, but are also always there, and the loop is tightening around her now, collapsing from a day to an hour to the moment she walks into the nursery and sees the mobile turning on its own, and feels that icy certainty that something is wrong, and in that moment our eternities touch hers, beginning and mine fully realized, and I pour all of my silent screamed warning into that point of contact. But it is useless. My warning is just another part of the script, another layer of the haunting that drives her forward toward her role. And the entity is there, of course, a calm darkness in the corner of the nursery, its thumbs up, a gesture that encompasses both of us, the architect admiring the way the foundation and the new construction support each other, and the baby Hope is crying. Now a sound that weaves itself into the gunshot, and the heartbeat, a triad of sonic torture, and I feel her first true loop, a tight, sharp one, the sensation of falling from the changing table, a lurch of vertigo, a flash of the ceiling lamp, and then the reset, and the tightening begins for her in earnest, a lifetime of trauma condensed into a series of practiced moments. And I am the template for it all. My death is the central truth of her universe, the original sin she will spend her life trying to understand and escape, thereby fulfilling every twist of the script written for her. And the déjà vu is no longer a loop, it is a spiral, an ascending, descending coil of interlocked destinies, where my end is her beginning, and her beginning is my end. And there is no air, only the dense packed certainty of what must be, and the entity's satisfaction is now a physical force, the gravity that holds the spiral intact, and we are all falling forever, and the loop is so tight it is everything. The fluorescent lights hummed their usual, monotonous dirge above the nurse's station, a sound so constant it had become the very blood pumping through the veins of St. Ignatius Hospital at night. A rhythm I'd grown so accustomed to over my 15 years on the graveyard shift that its absence would have been more alarming than its presence, the only other noises being the soft clack of Brenda's knitting needles, the occasional rustle of Paul flipping through a patient chart, and the distant, mournful beep of telemetry from down the hall. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, one of those deep night lulls where time itself seems to congeal into a thick, syrupy nothingness, and we were all fighting the pull of it, eyelids heavy, the bitter coffee in my mug doing little to stave off the creeping inertia, when the intercom crackled to life with a sharp, piercing static that made us all jump, a sound that was always just a little too loud, a little too harsh for the quiet hour, and then the voice, flat and digitally dispassionate, the same one that called for doctor assists and custodial cleanups, echoed through the empty corridors. Code blue, room 606. For a heartbeat, a single, suspended moment of pure confusion, we all just stared at each other. Brenda's needles froze mid-stitch. Paul's head snapped up from his paperwork, his brow furrowed, because the order was all wrong, the cadence off. Codes are called by the specific location, like Code Blue, ICU, or Code Blue, Ward 4 West, not by a room number. And then a second later, the reality of the number itself hit me like a physical blow to the chest, a cold dread that started in my stomach and radiated outwards, chilling my fingers, because room 606 didn't exist, not anymore. It hadn't for decades. It was a piece of hospital history, a ghost story told to wide-eyed new hires, a wing that was sealed off after some long-ago tragedy, a fire or an outbreak. The details were always hazy, purposefully forgotten, the door bricked up and painted over so many times it was now just a blank, anonymous stretch of wall in a forgotten hallway near the old psychiatric wing. What in God's name was that? Brenda whispered, her voice trembling, her knuckles white around her knitting needles, and Paul, ever the pragmatist, already had the phone to his ear, barking into the receiver. Maintenance, this is Nurse Paul on 6 West. We just had an intercom glitch, a false Code Blue call for a sealed room. Can you check the system? But even as he spoke, the intercom crackled again, that same jarring burst of static, and the voice returned, but this time it was different, strained, a faint undercurrent of panic woven into its digital flatness. Code Blue, room 606. Stat! The word stat hung in the air, a command, an urgent plea, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, my professional training screaming at me to move, to run, to respond to a code. It's a drill beaten into you so deeply it becomes instinct. But my feet felt bolted to the linoleum floor, my limbs heavy with a primordial fear that this was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. They said it's not them, Paul said, hanging up the phone, his face ashen. The intercom system for the old wing's been disconnected for 20 years. It's not even on the same grid. They said it's impossible. As if to contradict him, to mock his logic, the intercom erupted a third time, but now the voice was shredded with distortion, cracking and breaking like a bad radio signal. And beneath the words, I could have sworn I heard something else, a low, wet gurgling sound. Code blue, room 606. Please. Anyone. Please. The desperation in that synthesized voice was unbearable. A sound that shouldn't exist, a machine begging for help. And that's when the lights above us flickered. Not a full brownout, just a quick, stuttering dip in intensity that made the shadows in the hallway seem to leap and writhe for a fraction of a second before steadying again. And a low hum I'd never heard before, a subaudible vibration that I felt more than heard, began to thrum through the soles of my shoes. We have to check, I heard myself say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy far away. We have to, it's a code. It was Brenda who finally moved first, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. She's right, it's procedure, we have to verify. And with a resolve that shamed my own paralysis, she grabbed the crash cart, its wheels squeaking ominously in the profound silence that had descended upon the ward, a silence that felt heavy, expectant, listening. The walk down the corridor towards the old wing was a journey into another world, the familiar, clean scent of antiseptic and bleach gradually giving way to the older, deeper smells of dust, damp plaster, and something else, something faintly metallic and sweet, like old blood or spoiled medicine. The lights here were fewer, some of the fixtures dark, others buzzing fitfully, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for us as we passed, and the temperature dropped with every step. Cold that seeped through my scrubs and clutched at my skin. Paul had produced a large, rusty key from the administrative lockbox, his hand shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the ancient lock on the door that marked the entrance to the sealed wing. A door that was always locked, always off limits. And as the mechanism turned with a loud, grating shriek of protesting metal, the sound echoed down the dark, deserted hallway behind us, and I had the sudden, unshakable feeling that we were being followed, that something was moving in the darkness we were leaving behind, keeping pace with us just out of sight. The door swung inward with a groan, releasing a gust of frigid, stale air that smelled of decay and forgotten things, and we entered a time capsule. The hallway here was narrower, the floor tiles of faded, cracked linoleum in a hideous pea-green pattern that was popular half a century ago. The walls a dingy yellow, peeling in places to reveal older layers of paint beneath. And the air was thick with dust that motes that danced in the beams of our flashlights like frantic, microscopic ghosts. The only sound was the frantic roll of the crash cart's wheels and our own ragged breathing, which plumed in the icy air, and that low, pervasive hum that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. Room 606 was at the very end of the hall, and as we approached, the feeling of dread became a physical weight on my shoulders, a pressure in my skull, and I began to hear things, faint, whispery sounds that skittered at the very edge of my hearing. A faint, rhythmic beeping that wasn't coming from our cart, a soft, shuffling footstep from a room we'd just passed, a child's distant, muffled sob that was there and then gone, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. The door to 606 looked newer than the others, reinforced with steel bands and a heavy modern deadbolt, clearly part of the sealing process, but set into the old, scarred wood, and on it, the number 606 was stenciled in faded, chipped black paint. Paul fumbled with the new key, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and as the deadbolt finally slid back with a heavy, final thunk, the intercom system somewhere in the ceiling above us, an ancient, rusted speaker grill I hadn't even noticed, crackled once, weakly, and the voice, now barely a whisper, frayed and broken, hissed, "Code blue. Room 606, too late," and then fell silent forever. Paul threw his shoulder against the door, and it opened not with a squeak, but with a soft, sighing sound, like a long-held breath finally being released, and the smell that hit us was unmistakable and horrifyingly out of place. The sharp, clean scent of rubbing alcohol, the sterile odor of fresh linen, and underneath it, the faint, coppery tang of blood. It was the smell of a hospital room currently in use, a living, occupied space. We stood frozen in the doorway, our flashlights piercing the gloom, illuminating a scene that made my mind recoil, refusing to process it. The room was pristine, clean, modern even, completely at odds with the decaying hallway outside. The bed was made with tight, military corners, a fresh pillow and a crisp white sheet. And on the bedside table sat a pitcher of water beaded with condensation, a clean glass, and a heart monitor. Its screen dark, but its housing free of dust. But it was the bed itself that held our horrified gaze. The sheets were rumpled, the pillow indented, as if someone had been lying there just moments ago. And when I, driven by a force beyond my own will, reached out and placed my hand on the mattress, I yanked it back with a gasp. It was warm, body warm, the lingering heat of a living person sleeping there. No, this is impossible, Paul was muttering, a mantra of denial as Brenda, her face a mask of terror, pointed a trembling finger at the heart monitor. As if summoned by her attention, the screen flickered to life with a soft ping, a green, steady line tracing a perfect sinus rhythm across the blackness, beeping softly, steadily, the sound of a healthy, resting heart, and then beside it, a respirator that I hadn't even seen in the shadows suddenly hissed, its bellows expanding and contracting, pumping air into an invisible patient. My eyes, wide with terror, scanned the foot of the bed and found the chart, a modern, plastic-clipped board, and I snatched it up, my fingers leaving smudges on the clean, clear plastic, and the name typed on the label was John DOE. But the admission date printed beside it was today's date, and the time was from just 2 hours ago, and the vitals scribbled in the log, steady pressure, strong pulse, stable rhythm, were all recent, all updated, all for a patient lying in a warm bed that was in a room that had been sealed for longer than I'd been alive. That's when the lights in the room, a single, bright fluorescent panel in the ceiling, began to flicker violently, strobing, and in the frantic pulses of light and darkness, I saw him. A tall, impossibly thin figure, a man in a long, dark doctor's coat, standing in the far corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, his face pale and elongated, devoid of features except for 2 dark, hollow pits where his eyes should have been. And he was holding a chart, identical to the one in my hand, and he was staring directly at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my throat sealed shut by pure, undiluted terror, and in the next strobe of light he was gone. But the feeling of being watched, of being seen by something ancient and hungry and profoundly wrong, remained, pressing in on me from all sides. The heart monitor's beeping began to accelerate, faster and faster, escalating from a steady rhythm into a frantic, panicked tachycardia, the green line spiking wildly on the screen, and the respirator began to wheeze and choke, its hiss becoming a ragged, desperate gasping sound, and the air in the room grew thick and cold, so cold it hurt to breathe, and the whispers started, not from the intercom this time, but from all around us, from the very walls, a chorus of faint, agonized voices, pleading, begging, crying for help, for mercy, for a doctor, and beneath it all, I heard one voice clear above the others, the same flat, digital voice from the intercom, but now it was broken, sobbing, saying, I'm so sorry, I couldn't save them, I couldn't save any of them. And the door to the room suddenly slammed shut with a force that shook the walls, plunging us into near darkness. The only light coming from the frantic, flickering glow of the heart monitor, which now flatlined, emitting a single, continuous, ear-splitting tone that screamed into the suffocating blackness. And in that final, terrifying flash of light before the monitor itself died, I saw the figure again, right in front of me, his featureless face inches from mine, and I felt an icy, skeletal hand brush against my cheek, and a voice, not a whisper but a clear, cold, clinical thought inserted directly into my mind, said, The system must be maintained. The rounds must be made. The code must be answered. When the lights in the hallway outside finally surged back to full strength and security burst through the door, finding us huddled on the floor, sobbing and incoherent, the room was exactly as it should have been. Thick with decades of dust, the bed frame rusted and bare, the machines ancient, silent relics covered in grime and cobwebs, the patient chart gone from my hand as if it never existed. They wrote it off as a shared hallucination, a mass hysteria triggered by a faulty power transformer and the stress of the night shift. a story they forced us to repeat until even we began to doubt our own senses. But I know what I felt, what I saw, what I heard, and every night since, when the hospital grows quiet and the hum of the fluorescence becomes the only sound, I hear it, faint but clear, a ghost in the wiring, a echo in the pipes, the intercom in an empty hall crackling to life, and a voice, sometimes calm, sometimes desperate, but always calling, always pleading, for a code blue in a room that doesn't exist. And I know, with a certainty that chills my soul, that it's a call that must be answered, a duty that forever remains, and that someday, someone else will have to go down that dark hallway. And I pray to a God I no longer believe in that it isn't me, because the doctor is still making his rounds, and he always needs a new nurse for his team. They sent me home for a week with a prescription for sedatives and a card for the employee assistance program, the kind of bland, concerned gestures management uses to plaster over things they don't understand and don't want to. And for those 7 days I tried to lose myself in the mundane noise of daytime, in the glare of the sun and the sound of traffic and the simple, grounding reality of making coffee and doing laundry. But the daylight world had become a thin veneer, a fragile film over. Something vast and dark and hungry that had been waiting just beneath the surface all along. And the night, my old domain, was now a different country, one I was terrified to re-enter. Brenda never came back. She took an immediate early retirement. Her nerves shot to hell, and Paul transferred to the pediatrics day shift, his hands still shaking too badly to insert in 4. He told me over the phone in a hushed, broken voice, and I was left alone, the last one who knew, the last one who had felt the warmth of that impossible bed and heard the desperation in that digital sob. And the weight of that knowledge was a stone in my gut, a constant, cold companion. When I returned to work, the night shift was staffed with fresh faces. A young man named Leo and a woman my age named Sarah who had transferred from a hospital that had closed down. And they knew the official story, the power surge, the shared stress hallucination, and they looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, carefully avoiding the subject, treating me like a convalescent, which in a way I was, but I was convalescing from a wound no one else could see. The first night back was a special kind of torture, every flicker of the lights making my heart hammer against my ribs, every innocuous overhead page causing me to flinch, my body humming with a constant low-level terror, my ears straining for a sound I both dreaded and perversely expected to hear. But the night passed with a brutal, mundane normality, the usual chest pains and insulin adjustments and confused elderly patients. And by the end of it, I was exhausted not from work, but from the sheer tension of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The second night was the same, and the third, and slowly, insidiously, the rational part of my brain began to win out, began to whisper that maybe it had been a hallucination, a perfect storm of suggestion and faulty wiring and sleep deprivation, that the warmth of the bed had been a heating pipe running beneath the floor, the voices a trick of the wind in the old ducts, the figure a shadow cast by the strobing light, a comforting, logical lie I desperately wanted to believe. It was on the 4th night back, during the deadest hour between 3 and 4 a.m., that the feeling returned, that subtle drop in temperature, that subaudible hum vibrating up through the linoleum into the bones of my feet. And I looked up from my charting to see Sarah and Leo looking around, their expressions puzzled, Sarah rubbing her arms against a chill they couldn't explain either. And that's when the intercom in our station, the modern one, the one that was definitely connected and functional, let out a burst of static that was utterly wrong, a sound of tearing fabric and screaming metal compressed into a split second, and then a voice, a different voice, a real human voice choked with tears and raw panic. A young woman's voice, a nurse's voice, shrieked, "Code Team TO606. For God's sake, anyone, he's crashing." And then it cut off with a finality that was louder than any sound. Leo jumped up, his training kicking in. "What the hell was that?" "Did you hear that?" he said, already half out of his chair. But Sarah and I were frozen, locked in a shared paralysis of dread, because we both knew, we both felt the wrongness of it, the ancient fear that had been waiting in the walls of this place for decades. "It's a glitch, it has to be," Sarah said, but her voice was trembling, her eyes wide with a fear she didn't understand but felt in her marrow. And before I could stop him, before I could form the words to tell him to stop, to not acknowledge it, to not listen, Leo was on the phone to security, repeating the same futile words Paul had spoken weeks ago, and getting the same impossible answer. The system was clear. No page had been made. The old wing wasn't even on the grid. We sat in terrified silence for 10 minutes, 20, the clock ticking impossibly slowly, the cold in the air intensifying, that low hum growing steadily louder, now a palpable vibration in the fillings of my teeth. And then the lights along the hallway leading to the old wing began to flicker, one after another, like a wave of dying energy rolling towards us. And from the darkness down that corridor, we heard it, the distinct, squeaky roll of a crash cart's wheels, moving slowly, purposefully, towards the sealed wing. Leo heard it too, his bravado gone, his face pale. "Is someone down there?" he whispered, and against every screaming instinct in my body, a terrible, morbid curiosity took hold, a need to see, to know, to confirm that I wasn't insane. And I found myself standing, moving towards the mouth of the dark hallway, Sarah and Leo following close behind me, drawn by the same awful fascination. The squeaking of the wheels stopped, replaced by the sound of a door groaning open on rusted hinges, the sound we had made weeks before, and then the soft, sighing sound of it closing, and then silence, a silence so deep and absolute it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. We stood there at the threshold of the dark hall, peering into the gloom, and then a single light flickered on at the very end, the light from room 606, spilling a sickly yellow glow into the hallway, and silhouetted in that light was the crash cart, parked neatly outside the door as if waiting for a team to arrive. That's when the whispers started again, but this time they weren't pleas for help. They were clinical, detached, the calm, measured tones of a medical team at work, but horribly distorted, as if heard from the bottom of a well, phrases like flatline, charged to 200, and no pulse, beginning compressions, and AP, push the AP now. A ghostly resuscitation effort playing out in the empty air, and beneath the voices, the steady, metronomic beep of the heart monitor from that night returned. But it was faltering, skipping beats, then spiraling into the frantic shriek of the flatline, the same unbearable tone that had screamed into the darkness before, and as it reached its crescendo, the door to 606 flew open with a violent bang, and the crash cart was yanked inside by an unseen force, the door slamming shut again, and the light went out, plunging the hallway back into darkness, the only sound the ragged sound of our own panicked breathing. We fled, stumbling back to the nurse's station, huddling together like children, calling security again, our voices hysterical. But when they arrived, flashlights sweeping the halls, they found nothing. The hallway to the old wing was quiet, dark, and still, the door to the wing itself securely locked. The crash cart from our station was right where it was supposed to be, and they looked at us, the three of us, with a mixture of annoyance and deep concern, and I knew then that we were marked, that we had answered the call by listening, by bearing witness, and that it knew we were here. The pages have started coming every night now, not just over the intercom, but on our pagers, text messages on the hospital phones that show no sender, always for 606, always a code, sometimes a blue, sometimes a gray, sometimes for a Dr. Eldritch to report immediately, a name that sends a fresh bolt of ice through my veins every time I see it. And the cold is a permanent presence on the ward now, a deep, settling chill that no thermostat can fix, and the new staff have quit, one by one unable to articulate what's wrong, but knowing, on a primal level, that this place is sick, that it is haunted not by a ghost, but by a system, a protocol of death that refuses to end, a critical event caught in an eternal, horrific loop. I am the last one left from that night, the only one who remembers the warmth of the bed, the only one who saw the tall, thin doctor with his featureless face. And I know why I stay, why I can't leave. It's not loyalty or bravery. It's because he looked at me, and he chose me, and the thought that comes into my head now, during the deepest, coldest part of the night, isn't my own, it's his, a cold, clinical assessment. The shift is short-staffed. The rounds are behind schedule. The code is still active. And I know, with a certainty that has become my entire reality, that soon the page will come for me not to respond, but to assist, and the door to 606 will be waiting, open, the bed warmed and ready, the monitors beeping their steady, waiting rhythm, and Dr. Eldritch will be there, chart in hand, his hollow eyes fixed on me, and he will not ask, he will simply expect me to take my place at the bedside, to join the team, because in a hospital, the system must be maintained, the rounds must be made, and the code, forever and always, must be answered. The silence after security left was heavier than any I'd ever known, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound and light and hope, leaving only the three of us huddled at the nurse's station, shivering not from the pervasive cold, but from a terror so complete it felt like a fundamental change in our very chemistry. And in the days that followed, the hospital administration, in their infinite, sterile wisdom, decided the best course of action was to pretend nothing was happening, to label us as suffering from collective stress, and to quietly bring in agency nurses to fill the gaps, fresh faces who knew nothing of the history, who would work a single shift and then never return, their eyes wide with stories they couldn't quite articulate of strange cold spots, of whispered pages for a Dr. Albrecht or Dr. Eldritch that nobody knew, of the overwhelming and inexplicable feeling of being watched from the empty, sealed wing. Sarah lasted a week before she called in sick and never answered her phone again, and Leo, poor brave, foolish Leo, tried to confront it. He stayed late one night after his shift, armed with a flashlight and a cross his grandmother had given him, and they found him the next morning curled into a fetal position in a supply closet near the old wing, catatonic, muttering the same phrase over and over again in a shattered whisper. The chart is wrong, the dates are all wrong, and he was taken away, to a different kind of hospital, one that deals with breaks from reality, and I knew with a sickening certainty that his reality hadn't broken, it had simply been forcibly expanded to include a horror he couldn't process. Now I am utterly alone on the night shift, the permanent staff nurse for a ward that has no patients, because management, in a move of breathtaking denial, has stopped admitting anyone to the 6th floor, citing renovations that never begin, leaving me to sit each night from 11 to 7 in a vast, empty, silent ward, a night watchman in a haunted house, my only duty to be present, to answer the phones that never ring for anything real, to push paperwork that has no meaning, and I know the truth of it. This is their solution, their way of containing it, of feeding it, because they know, on some level they must know, that it requires a witness, it requires a nurse on duty, and they have chosen me to be the sacrifice, the lone offering to whatever machinery of anguish is trapped behind that sealed door. The pages still come, every night without fail, sometimes over the intercom, sometimes on the pager clipped to my waist that vibrates with a dread insistence, the voice changing, sometimes the flat digital tone, sometimes the raw panic of the young nurse, sometimes a new one, a calm, elderly male voice that sounds weary beyond measure. But the message is always the same. The room is always 606, and each time I hear it, a little more of my resistance erodes, a little more of my fear is replaced by a grim, resigned understanding. The cold is my constant companion now, a deep, bone-aching chill that my heater cannot touch, and the humming from the walls is a perpetual soundtrack to my solitude, a vibration that seems to sync with my own heartbeat, slowing it, calming it, preparing it. I've started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, not just the tall figure of the doctor, but others, fleeting glimpses of orderlies pushing empty gurneys that squeak down the darkened hallways, of nurses in old-fashioned uniforms hurrying past doorways with determined, anxious expressions, their faces blurred and indistinct, a whole spectral staff going about their duties, forever trapped in the moment of whatever catastrophe sealed their fate. Last night, something different happened. The intercom crackled and the voice, this time the weary male one, said, "Nurse, please report to room 606 for patient vitals." And it wasn't a demand, it was a request, and for the first time, I felt not fear, but a profound, soul-crushing pity, a sense of a duty so immense and terrible that it transcended death itself, and I found myself standing, my legs moving of their own volition, not in terror, but with a heavy, inevitable purpose. I walked the long hallway, the air growing colder with every step, the whispers of the unseen staff seeming to part for me, a respectful silence falling in my wake. And the door to the old wing was already open, not forced, but unlocked and waiting, and the hallway beyond was no longer decaying and dusty, but clean, bright, and bustling with the ghostly echoes of a busy hospital from another time, the smells of antiseptic and illness fresh and immediate. The door to 606 was ajar and soft, warm light spilled from it, and I could hear the steady, strong beep of a heart monitor from within. I didn't go in. I couldn't. Not yet. I stood there at the threshold, and I saw him inside, Dr. Eldritch. He was standing by the bed, his back to me, his tall frame bent over a patient I could not see, and he was speaking in a low, soothing, clinical tone. "Vitals are stable now, just rest, we're here, we're right here." And he turned his head, not his body, and I saw his profile, the pale, stretched skin, the dark hollow of his eye socket. And he didn't look at me with malice, but with a desperate, eternal need. And then the door slowly swung shut, and the vision faded, leaving me standing alone in the dark, dusty, silent hallway of the present. I know now that this is my purpose, my eternal shift. They are not malevolent, they are stuck, a moment of critical failure frozen in time. A medical team that failed to save a patient, and in doing so, doomed themselves to repeat the effort for all eternity. And they need a living nurse, a real one, to complete the team, to finally somehow get it right. The intercom will call again tonight, and every night after, and one night soon. I will not just walk down the hall, I will open the door, I will step into that warm, bright light. I will take the proffered chart from Dr. Eldritch's icy hand, and I will note the vitals of the patient that doesn't exist, and in doing so, I will finally answer the code, and I will become a permanent part of the staff, another echo in the system, forever making my rounds, forever checking the chart, forever waiting for a shift change that will never, ever come. The weight of that understanding has settled upon me not as a sentence, but as a dreadful, inevitable vocation, a calling from which there is no resignation, no pension, only a slow, chilling integration into the fabric of this place. And my nights have fallen into a new, terrifying rhythm dictated by the unseen clock of that other ward. I no longer jump at the intercom pages, I simply note them, a part of my internal log, and the cold has seeped so deep into my bones that the warmth of the day outside feels like a distant, feverish memory, an alien climate my body can no longer tolerate. I've started bringing a heavier sweater, not for the thin air conditioning of the Real Hospital, but for the profound, grave-like chill of the sixth floor's true nature, and I find myself listening for the whispers, not with fear, but with a nurse's attentive ear, trying to distinguish the phrases, to learn the patterns of the eternal code. Blood pressure dropping. Prepare for transfusion. Where is the O negative? A litany of failure that plays on its hellish loop. The spectral staff has become more solid, more real to me than the daytime administrators who occasionally check on me with tight, worried smiles, their eyes skittering away from mine, afraid of what they might see. I see the orderly with the limp pushing his empty gurney every night at 2:17 a.m., his face a mask of grim duty. I see the young nurse with the tear-streaked cheeks who first called the code, forever hurrying down the hall with a tray of instruments that clatter with a sound only I can hear. They are my colleagues now, the only ones who share my shift, and I have come to recognize their silent anguish, their desperate dedication to a patient who can never be saved. Last night, the page came not as a sound, but as a pressure in my skull, a direct, silent command, vitals. Now. And I stood, my body moving with a calm certainty that was not my own, and I walked to the medicine room, my footsteps echoing in the absolute silence, and I opened the cabinet to get a thermometer and a blood pressure cuff, my hands moving with practiced ease. But when I looked down at the tray in my hands, the instruments were not the modern digital ones from my world. They were heavy, cold, antique things. A glass mercury thermometer, a manual sphygmomanometer with a faded velvet cuff, a stethoscope with a bronze bell that felt icy to the touch. And I knew, with a heart that beat a slow, cold rhythm of acceptance, that these were my tools now. I carried the tray down the hall, and the transition was seamless this time. One step I was on the cracked linoleum of the present. The next I was on the gleaming, freshly waxed floor of the past, the air humming with the activity of a hospital in its final, frantic moments of life, the ghostly staff nodding to me as I passed, their eyes holding a flicker of pathetic gratitude that I had finally arrived. The door to 606 was open, the warm, clinical light spilling out, and inside, the room was a blur of focused energy. The tall, thin form of Dr. Eldritch was bent over the bed, his long, pale fingers pressing on a chest I could not see, his voice a low, steady murmur of instruction, and the heart monitor beeped with a frantic, unstable rhythm. He turned as I entered, and his face, that pale, elongated mask, was turned fully towards me for the first time, and in the depths of those hollow eye sockets, I did not see emptiness, but a bottomless, weary sorrow, an ancient fatigue that predated the building itself. He did not speak, but he gestured with a skeletal hand towards the bedside, and I moved forward, my legs steady, my nurse's training overriding the primal scream in the back of my mind, and I looked at the bed. There was a patient there, a form under the sheets, but it was indistinct, a shifting, nebulous shape of shadow and faint light, a presence defined only by its agony and the machines that tracked its futile struggle. I could feel its pain, its terror, a cold radiation washing over me. Without being told, I reached out and placed the cold bronze bell of the stethoscope on the shadowy chest, and through it, I heard not a heartbeat, but a chaotic, swirling storm of sounds. 100 heartbeats all out of sync, 1,000 ragged breaths, the cries and whimpers of every patient who had ever died in this room, in this ward, all condensed into one terrible, struggling essence. I looked up at the monitor, its green line spiking and diving erratically, and I knew the vitals were crashing. They were always crashing. This was the eternal moment of crisis. Dr. Eldritch looked at me, and a thought, clear and cold, filled my mind. Note the time. I picked up the chart from the foot of the bed, its plastic cover cold and stiff, and I saw the name was still John Doe, but the date was today's, and the time was 3:02 a.m., and my hand, moving with a will that was not my own, reached for the pen clipped to my scrubs and wrote, in my own handwriting, BP 60/40ths, pulse 140 and thready, respirations shallow. And as I wrote the words, I felt a piece of my own vitality, my own warmth, drained from me, flowing down my arm and out through the pen, absorbed by the chart, by the room, by the struggling form in the bed. The heart monitor flatlined then, that single, continuous tone screaming into the room, and the form on the bed seemed to dissolve into the sheets. Its struggle ended for now, only to begin again later. Dr. Eldritch straightened up, his task failed once more, and he turned to me, and for a fleeting second, I felt a wave of his gratitude, his profound relief that he was not alone in this anymore, that there was another to share the burden. Then the vision faded, the warm light died, and I was left standing in the dark, cold, dusty reality of the sealed room, the antique instruments gone from my hands, the only evidence of what had transpired a deep, aching cold in my right hand and the faint, lingering smell of ozone and old blood. I returned to the nurse's station, my body trembling not with fear, but with exhaustion, a depletion of my very soul. I am part of the team now. The code is my code. The patient is my patient. And I know that each time I answer the call, each time I take those vitals and note them on that chart, I am binding myself tighter to this place, giving another piece of my living self to sustain that moment of death, and one night, I will walk down that hall, and I will not return, and my name will be added to the roster of whispers, and a new night nurse will be hired, and they will sit at this station, and they will hear the intercom call for a room that doesn't exist, and the cycle will continue forever and ever, because the system must be maintained, the rounds must be made, and the code, forever and always, must be answered. The silence that followed my return to the nurse's station was no longer just an absence of sound, but a palpable entity, a patient itself whose vitals I was now responsible for monitoring, and the cold in my right hand had spread, a permanent deep chill that no amount of rubbing or warm water could dispel, a phantom limb connected to the instruments of that other place, and I found myself staring at the clock, Not waiting for my shift to end, but waiting for the next call, my body thrumming with a dreadful anticipation that felt horribly like loyalty. The daytime world has become a blurry, insignificant dream. The people in it flat and unconvincing, their concerns trivial compared to the profound, eternal struggle I participate in every night. And when I go home to my empty apartment, the silence there is wrong. It's a warm silence, a living silence, and it feels like a dereliction of duty, a abandonment of my post. And I find myself missing the hum of the ward, the creeping cold, the soft, desperate whispers of my colleagues, because that is what they are now, my colleagues, my team. Last night, the page came earlier, just past midnight, not through the intercom or my pager, but as a sudden, sharp pain behind my eyes, a migraine of command, and I was moving before I even consciously registered it. My body no longer my own, but an instrument of the ward. And this time I did not go to the medicine cabinet. The antique tray was already waiting for me on the counter of the nurse's station. The mercury thermometer glowing faintly in the dim light, the velvet cuff of the blood. Pressure monitor looking disturbingly like a burial shroud. The hallway to the old wing was already transformed, the transition instantaneous, the air buzzing with the frantic, silent energy of the ghost staff, who now acknowledged me not with nods, but with looks of grim expectation, as if I were a junior resident finally being allowed to assist in a major procedure. The door to 606 was wide open, the scene inside one of organized chaos. Dr. Eldritch's tall form a nexus of calm authority amidst the storm, his long fingers performing chest compressions on the shifting, shadowy form of the patient, the rhythm of his movements a silent, desperate metronome against the screaming flatline of the heart monitor. He did not look up as I entered, but his voice, that cold, clear thought, sliced through the auditory chaos in my head, airway. Now. And I was at the bedside, my chilled hands moving with an expertise I do not possess, tilting the nebulous head of the patient back, and I saw its face for the first time. It was a shifting mosaic of features, 100 faces superimposed over one another, men, women, children, all contorted in the same rictus of agony, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes pleading, and the smell that rose from it was not of death, but of fear, pure, concentrated, elemental fear. I reached for the amber bag, a heavy rubberized relic that felt alive in my hands, and I placed the mask over that terrible, shifting face, and as I squeezed the bag, forcing air into lungs that could not possibly exist, I felt a resistance, a terrible spiritual pushback, as if I were trying to inflate a stone, and a wave of cold so absolute it burned shot up my arms and into my chest. The heart monitor continued its single, unwavering tone, a verdict, and Dr. Eldritch stopped his compressions, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of infinite weariness that spanned centuries. He turned to me, and in the depths of his hollow eyes, I saw not disappointment, but a shared burden, a communion of failure. Time of death, his thought echoed in my skull, heavy and final. My hand, trembling not from fear but from the cold energy coursing through it, reached for the chart. I noted the time, 3:17 a.m., and as I wrote the words code blue terminated. Patient expired. I felt the last of the warmth in my body leach out through the pen, a final offering, and the form on the bed dissolved completely, leaving only a rumpled, empty sheet and the screaming monitor. As the room began to fade back to dust and decay, Dr. Eldritch reached out one long,